disinfecting residual. That's your whole boosting operation and water age management and main cleaning out in the distribution system. The second one was to reduce contamination risks. Those were actual, potential ingress points where the sewage or contaminated water could have entered directly into the distribution system. The third area was around operating procedures, pressure management, et cetera, and documentation of those practices. And then the fourth area is around water quality monitoring, gathering more data to really understand what's happening out there. So I'm going to talk through each of these, what progress has been made and where we're going with them. So with regard to disinfectant residual increase in maintenance, the main activity there has been the booster disinfection, and the good news is after months and months of operation now, that operation really has been very successful with just the pucks. You are largely meeting, you may recall early on we set a residual goal of greater than equal to 1 milligram per liter, given industry understanding of inactivation of E. coli. So if you are greater than equal to 1 milligram per liter, you should have very good protection in the distribution system. And so based on data that's been collected, and I'll show you the data, the thousands of data points, it's been your puck system in the reservoirs has been very, very effective. So this leads us to conclude that reservoir mixers do not appear to be necessary at this time, and that purchase of a portable disinfection system does also not appear to be necessary at the time. That's what Seattle brought in the initial event, a much more cumbersome, difficult machinery to operate, and your system is working pretty well. I'll show you here the results. This is throughout the history. Over on the left is September 24th, where you can see chlorine residuals were significantly lower and variable throughout the system. And then a boosting operation in the beginning, probably with Seattle on board for a few of those, and then took time to get things honed in. Thousands of data points collected over the first month of operations, and then over time we've keyed into 23. This represents 23 locations out in the distribution system, and we're largely meeting the goal of 1 milligram per liter. And when you get a hit below, the crews go out and turn water over and increase conditions at that location. So
I'd like to talk about that, Melinda.
Yes.
You've got a red line. Is this 6 sigma level? 5 sigma, 4 sigma? When you say it's largely okay, I'm not comfortable with that type of terminology. What I'd like to hear is, what I'd like to see is that red line, or actually all those dots, go above the red line, where the mean,
is something.
I'd like to get 6 sigma standard and recognize that to be at that standard, you're obviously going to have to bring the mean up there, and we're going to have to educate our population about why there may be a smell of chlorine, because reflect, and maybe my history is not right on this, but reflect, we only had 1 or 2 chlorine levels that were low at the time of the E. coli scare.
Well, you can see what they were, back the range. They're all pretty much below 1 back then, and now they're pretty significantly above 1. So yes, there are a couple spots, T3, M3.
Well, maybe the standard isn't 1. Maybe the standard is 0.5. Is that what the standard really is?
Well, we during the event, when we weren't sure where the contamination was coming from, and we didn't know if there was still more in the system, we set a goal. It's a goal of greater than or equal to 1 milligram per liter. And that goal was largely, and that was to inactivate whatever was in the system. And now you've largely met that goal, and yes, there are some. This is now without flushing. This is like your status quo. This is your routine distribution system water quality out there. It looks pretty darn good. And I have a lot more data to show you, even at dead ends and worst case locations. It pretty much is reaching 1. There are a couple problem areas, but I don't know. That would be an internal discussion of whether it's worth raising the entire system just for 1 or 2 trouble areas that you could address through other means, such as water age reduction or main cleaning. And
well, actually, upon reflection, it wasn't 1. It was 0.5, wasn't it? That our standard was 0.5, and we
maybe your internal goal might have been 0.5 at the time, which is pretty standard.
Well, Glenn, what was it? Wasn't our and Terry, wasn't our goal 0.5, and we were getting all excited because the E. coli hit whenever we dropped below 0.5.
But Mike, that's not correct. And the E. coli did not hit whenever we went below 0.5, and you'd hate for the public to be left with that impression.
Sure, sure it was.
No, that's just simply not true. But Glenn, if you wanted to come up and speak to what our whether we had targets and what they were, that'd be great.
Numerical goal, what we've had is just sort of the historical practice of how we move water through the system, and we know there are problem spots. We have a flushing program. This actually created a numerical goal for the first time. As Melinda said, it's based on what the science tells us about deactivating the E. coli. So we knew if we shot for this level that we were going to, anything left in the system would not be a problem. And now the goal is as we take care of the areas that Department of Health and Confluence has helped us identify where we need to make improvements, is to bring that red line down. We hope that's not the perpetual state. That was the state until we take care of the areas of risk that we can live with and we know it's safe.
Right, so Department of Health, the agreement was you would remain boosting, separate from all other Seattle public utility purveyors. Mercer Island would boost until these other sources of potential risk, which included the air vac vaults and cross-connection control program and other things were addressed. So this isn't necessarily meant to be a permanent condition. It's meant to be temporary until risks are reduced and we can demonstrate satisfactory operating procedures such as pressure control and other things. So yes, it's not 100%. I don't know if that was ever really intention for 100%. It's a goal, and you'll see if I can move on. You'll see there's thousands of data points. This is just what's coming out of the reservoirs, which one could argue could be increased further if the city wants to decide. It has to be one everywhere all the time, but I don't think that's really the intention. Again, this is the boosting operation coming out of the north and south reservoirs. The blue dots are the north, the red is the south. It's very nice and stable, hitting a range of 1.4 to 1.7, and you're hitting the targets, and we don't see a whole lot of variability. So it suggests you don't need a more advanced boosting operation to meet this target and to maintain it. So more than 1,000 samples have met this 1 milligram per liter goal. We could give you a percentage. It's probably 99.9% of all samples taken have met the goal. Of the 350 or more now, as of this week, samples that all have been negative for coliform bacteria. And given the satisfactory results we're seeing as part of this, what we're calling the transition monitoring, DOH has approved that as soon as the city gets 9 new permanent TCR sites, total coliform loss sites, once you get these 9 new permanent sample stands installed, you can go off this transition monitoring. And you'll only be doing your 14 permanent sites. So we'll be adding 9 more sample stands, and they should be installed by the end of July. That will bring you up to 14 permanent locations with significantly improved geographic coverage across the island. You may recall you have 5 sites now, 4 of which are in 1 pressure zone in the 492 pump zone. So DOH is approving you to go down to this new permanent status as well. And in addition to all that transition monitoring that we just showed you, in December, your staff did what they called an island-wide survey of chlorine residual. They sampled 112 locations. I said, I had to say, I couldn't say 100%, but 111 of the 112 were greater than equal to the goal, but 1 was at 0.98. So, of course, if we rounded that, it would be at 1, and with instrumentation reading, I'm sure, so pretty much 100% of 112 locations met the goal. And then in February and March, they measured 25 dead-end locations, and those are your worst case, oldest water, back up against a PRV valve or an actual dead end of a street where there's low demand, high water age, stagnant water, and 21 of those 25 met the goal, and the lowest reading of the 4 that didn't meet was 0.8. And the city plans to conduct that dead-end monitoring on a quarterly basis to demonstrate that we're continuing to very much largely meet this goal. So that's really quite impressive. Not many utilities can say that their lowest readings at dead ends is 0.8 in a surface water system with unlined cast iron pipe. So it's really doing very well. So another part of our current scope of work was to try to tease apart some of the causes of the decay in chlorine that we're seeing out in the system. Is leaving the reservoir 1.5. We want it to stay above 1 or at 1, so we've got about half a milligram per liter to play with that you're boosting. You're adding that amount right now. If you take that boosting away, you're going to fall below your goal. And so we're doing studies on the water to assess how much of that chlorine demand is just in the natural characteristics, what we call the bulk water. If you just took the water straight off of Seattle's system, and we do the tests in glass jars, so there's no pipe wall demand. So about a third of the chlorine goes away over a 5 to 7 day period just due to the conditions of the bulk water, and about 2/3 of the demand, that means the remaining 2/3 of the demand, is due to pipe wall reactions. Now, prior to the event and prior to your boosting, where you probably burned off a little biofilm and you've done a lot of flushing since then, maybe you would have had a higher ratio, maybe been a quarter bulk water, 3/4 pipe wall, and if you aren't able to do main cleaning, that pipe wall demand will continue to increase over time. But right now the conditions are about a 1/3, 2/3 split. So if you want to get off boosting, you're going to have to figure out a way to make up until you're cleared to stop boosting, until you're cleared to allow residual to go back below 1 milligram per liter again by reducing the other risks. You're going to have to offset that boosting benefit you're getting. And you can do that through either reducing water age further, which means a lot of turning over water, wasting water, flushing, whatever you need to do to keep the water moving, or further reducing the pipe wall demands through a more aggressive main cleaning program. And that's another piece of the work we're going to be working with you on, is evaluating opportunities for enhanced main cleaning. And you may recall that you, unlike other utilities in the area, your current flushing program is very constrained by discharge limitations into your sanitary and storm sewers. And so you can't just go out and open hydrants and let the water whistle as long as you want at high velocities as others are able to attain, because you have nowhere to put the water. So as part of our current work, we're going to come out and spend a day and do field demonstrations and see if there's ways that we can optimize the flushing practice, like either in terms of the length of the flushing loops, the velocity at which you flush, or the duration for which you flush. Maybe produce the same amount of water but get it through faster, if possible. It might not be possible, but see how much you're able to do in terms of main cleaning with your current practices, and then figure out, can they be improved upon with just flushing? And if not, we're going to prepare a sort of a menu, a matrix of alternative strategies that are more aggressive than flushing. And these include ice pigging, which I'm going to show you a little bit about. There's no-dust. It's a neutral, no-discharge flushing system where it's a vendor-provided service where they'll actually recollect the water that you use, and you can put it through multiple loops and it gets filtered, and you can actually put it back into the system. It's a zero-discharge. No, but it's a vendor-provided service and it can be expensive. So there are advantages and disadvantages to each of these. I'll talk through a couple of them now. So first is just to talk about flushing. This is research that we're actually doing, a Water Research Foundation project to compare flushing, ice pigging, and swabbing at a utility in Utah. This is in Park City, Utah. And just so you can get a visual for the difference between flushing at about 3 feet per second on the left versus going up to 6 feet per second, and just the sheer amount of force in cleaning, and then, of course, the volume of water you have to dispose of. But the theory is you go at a higher velocity for a shorter amount of time, and maybe it's the same quantity of water, it's just more effective at cleaning. But the bottles at the bottom, even flushing at 6 feet per second, we were not able to scour anything significant off of the pipes in this water system. Flushing just was not an aggressive enough technique, even though they could get to 6 feet per second, which is kind of one of the upper typical levels you recommend in a unidirectional flushing program. They also needed a more aggressive flushing program. And so
then we can't put this in the lake because of the chlorine?
You can dechlorinate. I think it's either volume or turbidity storing it gets sent into the stormwater system. I think it's what's in this. The pipes back up, the stormwater pipes back up, and they're filled with sediment. And those maybe can't be put in the lake. And I'm not sure what the sanitary discharge
But theoretically, you could pump directly into the lake, the water?
Yeah, we would have to dechlorinate first, and clearly you're dealing with a great volume of water. How do you contain it? I think vitamin C is one useful way to dechlorinate or to deactivate the chlorine. But yeah, we have all kinds of constraints to deal with that much water all over the island.
And so when you were saying that 2/3 is from the pipe contact, and that's just because of the type of pipes that we have in most of our system?
Yeah, you've got like 75% unlined cast iron pipe, and that's very tuberculated. It's filled with
Right.
tubercles and biofilm and chlorine demand-causing substances.
So the new pipes we're putting in, it's not an issue with the new pipes? Those are all lined, or... So it's just...
Yes,
it's
should be much better, but, and the Tolt is not filtered, so you have a lower sediment load, but the Cedar River is unfiltered, so there's still, some sediment in that water. People probably still get, I don't know, if you get discolored water complaints, people fill their bathtubs and can see, I remember on Tolt water because I live in Seattle, but, so you're having lower loading of sediment into the system, but there's years and years of accumulation out there.
And none of our system is looped right now at all? It's all just sort of dead end somewhere?
No, I'm sure there are looped areas, but you just can't generate the, you have to, when you're in a unidirectional flushing program, you have to actually want to valve off and isolate stretches of run and prevent the looping so that you can get a higher velocity through a known stretch of pipe and discharge that water, not pull from all different directions and stir stuff up and leave it in the system.
So there's no way of looping it back into the reservoirs?
No, and you wouldn't really want to put this water back in the reservoirs if we're stirring up biofilm, and it's got to be some places. Well, with ice pigging and others, it goes into a tanker truck and they haul it off and put it where they need to. These other techniques, swabbing and ice pigging, use less water, but
Could you explain the ice pigging?
Yes,
swabbing?
yes. Here's the next slide is ice pigging. So at the same utility, we did adjacent stretches of main, about 2,000-foot stretches. So the first one was flushing, 3 feet and 6 feet. We didn't see any discoloration. Then ice pigging, this is where you see dirty water's coming out. You can see in the middle picture, it's like a Slurpee. What they do, that large truck will show up here and overnight will make 10 tons of ice using your water. And they add salt to the water to lower the freezing point. And then in the exact same configuration as unidirectional flushing with valves closed, open one hydrant, the ice gets pumped in, you close it, use the water pressure to just push, literally like a pig, a slug of ice, about 20% of the pipe volume gets filled with Slurpee. And that just moves through. And the nice thing about ice pigging is it won't get hung up on a butterfly valve. If it gets stuck, it just melts over time. There's nothing to really get hung up in your system to break infrastructure. It can come out through a meter. You can have diameter changes in the pipe. So it's a new technology to the states. It's vendor provided. There's only one vendor in the states that provide it. But it's a really more aggressive than ice pigging, than flushing, and less aggressive than swabbing. And so that in this matrix will give you all the advantages, disadvantages, dollar per mile, vendor provided. Do you have to disassemble hydrants? Crew impacts on your crews versus. So there's advantages and disadvantages to each. But this quite interesting technology. And then the final option that we're doing detailed evaluation on in Park City is foam swabbing or cubing. Some people call it pigging, but pigging is actually something different. That's why they made the cube into a little pig. But that's what it is. It's a foam cube, but usually it would be about 25% larger than your pipe diameter that you're trying to clean, and it gets just jammed right. You have to disassemble a hydrant, and it gets jammed right into the hydrant port. You feed it out into the distribution system and hope it comes out at your exit hydrant where you're planning it to come out. And it's more aggressive, more effective. You'll get longer lasting benefits, but there are more risks associated. But this is common practice to manage plateau. City of Kent, lots of utilities around here do what we call swabbing.
Can you explain what the material is? I mean, what is actually being...
Yeah, it's a polyurethane foam, or it's just a foam. It's like a giant, dense sponge. NSF approved, right? Oh, yeah, so what we're showing at the top, you can see how dark those samples got when we did swabbing compared. So unidirectional flushing, we don't see any color change. Doesn't mean nothing came out. It's just not visually cleaning the pipe. Ice pigging, we see, more removal, and then swabbing is by far the more aggressive. And then further down the list would be actual pigging, where you're going to put a rigid, solid, not a compressible foam, but a rigid, solid, bullet-shaped pig into your pipe, and it will knock off all of those tubercles, but then you have to reline the pipe. It's cement. So that's really a rehabilitation process, not so much a main cleaning process. So that would go into your CIP world, which might be appropriate. Your mains are in pretty good shape. So it doesn't mean they have to be replaced. Maybe they should be rehabilitated instead in some cases. And this isn't one size fits all. You wouldn't do mile after mile of all one technique. There's a menu here that certain pipe materials respond better to certain techniques. And maybe there's some trouble areas. We want to just follow like a 1 mile path and clean that area out, and other parts of the island don't need it. So it's not like you have to do every mile, but you would do an assessment of what techniques are most appropriate where. Okay. Okay, so that's it on the update on the first item of residual increase in maintenance. The next one is on reducing contamination risks. And really we had just two main areas that we identified as potentially ongoing contamination risks, that we just couldn't rule out as a potential source of the E. coli in the phase 1 evaluation. And those were associated with your air vac vaults and your cross-connection control program. So just a brief update on the vault retrofits. Recall you have two types of vaults that have air vacs in them. One's a combined PRV air vac vault, and the other a standalone air vac vaults. And there's a picture there shown of a standalone vault where there's, if that floods and there's a pressure event, it could, since it's not vented to the atmosphere above grade, it could potentially draw contaminated water into the distribution system. And so that's a condition you want to retrofit. So the status of the retrofits are that a contractor has been hired and work is underway on all 60 of your combined PRV air vac vaults, and that work is supposed to be completed in April. Meanwhile, inspections of the standalone vaults is ongoing, and those retrofits will start in May as soon as the combined vaults are finished, and it's expected that work will be completed this year on all the vaults. And again, this is pretty much a requirement of getting off boosting, is to get these all retrofitted and up to design standards and take care of that potential contamination risk. Until there's this ongoing risk, we want to keep the chlorine levels up above, equal to 1. With regard to cross-connection control, there are various aspects of the program, the ordinance, the public communication, et cetera, that the staff is working on. And we're not going to cover that tonight because you're going to get a full presentation on that on May 4th. I do have a few individual bullet items on it on the final slide, which is an overview, but we weren't going to go into that in detail tonight. So then the next area was operating procedures and documentation, and here where we're really focusing is on pressure management. Remember, we talked about you could draw contamination in through those below-grade air vac vaults or through any unprotected cross-connection if the pressure of the distribution system drops suddenly due to a main break or due to a valve operation or due to a pump station operation. We want to be able to demonstrate that your routine operations are not causing pressure transients that make you susceptible to contamination within the distribution system. Anywhere there's a leak or a break or an unprotected cross-connection, if you've got low pressures moving across, you could be drawing in contamination. We have been poring over your available SCADA data, and I can tell you we have not seen any indication of an event that could have caused or contributed to contamination back over the on line 24, 25, 26, 27 when you had this E. coli contamination. However, the SCADA capabilities are not quite fast enough. They don't catch the pressure readings as fast as we want to be able to completely, without hesitation, check the box. So as part of this work, you've ordered 2 high-speed data loggers, and this picture shows they just strap on to a 2-inch hydrant port, and they can be placed anywhere out in the system. We ordered 2 so we can go upstream and downstream of important valves, operate the pump station, and just demonstrate. And these capture, I think, 6 pressure readings per second. And I mean, if you think about water hammer in your house, you open and close the valve, and it's just a matter of seconds, and that wave travels through your plumbing. So if readings are coming on your SCADA system every minute, every 2 minutes, every 5 minutes, we may not be seeing these pressure waves. But these high-speed data loggers, taking 6 readings per second, we can really demonstrate that it is or is not your operations. Routine flushing, you can go to, just move around the system, let them run and see what happens. You can go downstream of high-risk medical facilities and just demonstrate that your pressures are stable and that your operations are not impacting pressure.
So 2 is enough for the whole system?
Well, they're portable, yeah, so you'll study one area for a certain amount of time and then move them around.
But that pressure drop can be random throughout the system anytime?
That is correct, and yeah, chances are you're not going to catch, you won't have them perfectly positioned if there would be a main break, but to demonstrate purposeful operations, like operating that bypass valve, the high zone bypass valve, which was operated on the day of the contamination, you can position it upstream and downstream of that very important valve and demonstrate that it's coming on and coming off and over its time cycling does not create a pressure transient, and that operation of that valve did not contribute to the contamination event. So
I'm trying to, how many of those would you need to get a 95% coverage of the high, of the 2-inch, or how would you do that? Or could you do that? Is that something that we should strive for? This just seems so random that we might, if we do have a contamination, we might be positioned in the right place.
yeah, so the purpose is not necessarily to catch an event with this, it's to place them, purposefully go do an activity over, a day, or do flushing in an area for a week, and track, knowing your routine operations are not catching something. You can't, yes, you wouldn't happen to have it when one of your purveyors has a high-pressure event and back pressures into your system, you may or may not ever catch it, or a main break, or a pump station failure, but this is really to demonstrate that your practices are not impairing the safety of the distribution system. Now, because they're portable, you can play with it for years. You can go to, the staff pretty much knows where their low pressure, it's usually higher elevations, far away from reservoirs, far away from pump stations, or your more susceptible areas. So you can place them out there and just track over time and see how it looks. And you'll find some surprises, I'm sure. But in the criteria for optimized distribution systems, it's an annual partnership for safe water, AWWA. It's 2 data loggers that you move around, to your high susceptible areas and collect data over a 4-day period. And there's, So it seems like a cost-effective, reasonable approach. And we definitely want to do the bypass valve, first to a pump station. When those pumps come on and off, they're variable speed. There shouldn't be a problem, but just prove it and check the box. That there's nothing your operators did to cause this. There may be some surprises.
Bit of a wonky question, but do you have to take that off and then take it back to the lab and plug it in to get the data off it, or is it transmitting out and you're picking it up?
I think these you have to go download with a stick. You go out and download with a stick, but they do make different kinds. And your SCADA system's obviously transmitting back. Okay. But I think these, when they're collecting at 6 readings per second, you can only do that for a certain amount of time.
Yeah, before you're full.
Yeah, before they're full. So.
Thanks.
Here, I just wanted to provide an example. Now, this is from a different water system. This is not Mercer Island's data, but if your pressure data is being collected or averaged into 1-hour intervals, and this is what your reports look like, you think, oh, this looks pretty good. Yeah, we see some blips, but we're pretty much at 60 all the time and hardly ever above 80. That's great. But then when you increase the sensitivity of the data collection, and this is now the exact same data at 2-minute intervals, you see what look like just little blips are pretty significant, 30 psi drops that are routinely occurring. That's probably some operation that the utility is doing, causing that routine 30 psi drop. And now that's at a 2-minute interval. If you bring these down into seconds, it's quite possible those minimums go down to 10 or even down to 0, and that's when you realize you could be susceptible to back pressure and backflow from cross connections. So that's what these high-speed data loggers will tell us. What we're looking at for your system looks like the top graph, and those are at 1-minute intervals. So it's really good. It's very promising. We looked across 924 and 927. We didn't see hardly any blips, and those are at 1-minute intervals. But let's just get the data and confirm.
So do we have those high-speed data are they installed now, or?
They're on order.
They're on order.
Yeah.
We'll receive them next week. I think the 2 of them, the cost is $1,400, so they're not expensive items. Next week.
So let me ask you about those charts. And not only that, but also this question also applies with the chlorine readings. are you going to help us, are you going to put those charts, that data into control charts to help us identify when we should get excited and
Yes.
speak more in statistical language?
Yes, we can. In fact, the very last thing that we might be getting to is the water quality monitoring, and we can talk more about that. The pressures, yeah, well, that's very obvious. You just don't want to see spikes. According to 10 state standards, and many state, you're not supposed to ever go below 20 psi under any flowing conditions. 30 psi under main break or emergency conditions. So there are guidance that are very clear out there that we don't have to change, but interpreting water quality and water chemistry data is maybe more art than science. So just to finish up then, the operating procedures, the third part of our thing, is also then to develop, for the city to develop a manual of standard operating procedures, so written documentations of how best to do things, how the reservoir should be operated, how the pump station, how the bypass valves, et cetera. We're saying we want to do it by the end of the year because we want to get through all these evaluations first, because some of your processes, we may make recommendations to change your current practices. Your flushing may change, your pressure management may change. So once we've gone through these studies, then we will go through and help with preparation of some of these standard operating procedures. And this will be a living document that you will update as the years go by. So the final thing is water quality monitoring. The final step in the multiple barrier approach here to avoiding future contamination is around water quality monitoring and really understanding, a better understanding of system chemistry. And we showed you a ton of disinfectant residual data. That's ongoing. That's going to be regulatory driven. You have to do that monitoring for chlorine and coliform bacteria, et cetera, under the total coliform rule. But so this is going to take you above and beyond into what we're calling a surveillance monitoring program. And we want to just add a few parameters to what you'll be doing in your baseline to help give you a better understanding of your water quality conditions from what is coming in from Seattle's system, from your point of entry, to the meter, both spatially and seasonally. We're building the plan so that it leverages all the existing work and data you've collected as part of your transition monitoring, and that you'll also be collecting once you move to your permanent TCR monitoring. And this will really help assist with data-driven decision-making, when and where to flush, where to do main cleaning, the duration of your flushes. Like if you can measure turbidity in addition to chlorine, you're not leaving stirred up particles in the water, right? The chlorine might come back up, but there could still be particles that you can't see, that means you're terminating your flush too soon and you're letting potential biofilm and bacteria slosh around the system. So it'll help you with more data-driven decision-making for your routine operations, but hopefully also identify unusual conditions. And I know what you think this means. You're going to be able to find every potential source of contamination. It's just if there is a sudden chlorine demand in a region of the system, or if the pH is really not where it should be, or if you're seeing a lot of particles stirred up, maybe then we should go check. Was there a fire flow in this region, or does something happen? Things seem a little more unusual, or is it just a typical seasonal trend and it's in the range of normal, and we'll give you some, the goal and then the 1 or 2 standard deviations of like a control chart.
So you are going to do that?
We can do that.
It's not. Actually, I'd really like to nail down, because it's not so much having the data, it's being able to, from the top down, being able to understand the standard, either high or low, and whether we're in sufficient enough control.
Right.
Is that the package?
That is the ultimate goal here, but our involvement, you're going to need a long-term data set to do that. Even doing this once a month for the next year is still only 12 data points. That's not much to build a standard deviation and control chart on, but over time, yes, you will have a nice data set, and we will set it up for you. There's data management considerations there. We're already working with Terry on like those chlorine charts get updated every single week automatically. He just puts the data in, and the graph gets built. So we'll set you up with the spreadsheets that you need, and we can put the lines in, but those are going to shift over time as you actually build your baseline condition. We don't have the baseline condition yet for some of these parameters. So we could certainly provide guidance, and we can set the charts up.
There's a training, Kirsten, there's a training element to that.
Yes.
Also.
So, requires purchase of field equipment and staff training and data management considerations. So, we'll be working with you on that. So, with regard to the purchase of field equipment, it's probably a couple $1,000s. That an additional equipment for a turbidimeter and a pH meter and some probes that will give you much more insight into the actual chemistry of the water. Chlorine is the number one most important thing, and you're getting that. But there are other parameters that will help you really understand chemistry shifts that could be leading to biofilm disturbance, sloughing, bacteria, other problems that could result in coliform violations.
Well, I'm sorry, but you said that chlorine's the most important thing, and my emphasis on chlorine levels at the beginning of this was kind of poo-poo, so I brought up an old spreadsheet, and it is the information that we had here, Bruce. We were down to 0.1, 0.25, 0.28, 0.2 of when we started hitting total chloroform E. coli issues. So, I mean, just for the record, what I said at the beginning, chlorine is extremely important, and there's a relationship that I'm not going to let die between our chlorine being too low and chloroform E. coli hits.
Well, I'd be happy to take that one offline with more data.
It's important. It's important, so let's take it offline.
Okay.
When we reviewed the data, we didn't find like a correlation at above a certain or below a certain point you had positive E. coli. I think they were present in samples with decent chlorine residual as high as 0.88 or something like that.
Thank you. You just made the point I was trying to make earlier.
But certainly, lower chlorine makes you more susceptible to lots of microbial problems, so that is an important thing. Well, that's really the update. I wanted you to get used to seeing this graphic because we're sort of using this as the summary, the overview of the entire action plan, and you'll probably see it updated as we go. So everything in green is complete, and everything in black is underway. And nice to see. There's really a lot of green up there, and the black doesn't mean that nothing's been started. Something's been started. Something's moving on every one of these points. They're just not complete, so we can't make them green. So the upcoming activities are going to be these main cleaning evaluations, finishing up the vault retrofits, ongoing working on a cross-connection control program, and here you can see some of the key areas that staff is working on that you'll be updated on the May 4th meeting. Operating procedures, data loggers have been purchased. We're going to get them installed. We've reviewed your SCADA data. I'm not seeing any indication of pressure events. Development of SOPs will be ongoing throughout the year. Made lots of progress on water quality monitoring. The next thing is the beginning of surveillance monitoring, which should begin in April, actually. And then you probably do it monthly and then pare back over time as you get more data and get more of understanding of system conditions.
Okay, thank you. So you're at the end?
I'm at the end.
So questions, council? Okay, Joel.
I had two questions, and I don't know if this is more appropriate for Glenn or for you, but the report ends up referring to sampling site and permanent sampling station. Could you end up explaining to me the difference between the two? And just FYI, I'm new to the council, so this might have been covered a couple months ago, but...
No, that's a good question. There's a lot of terminology floating out there. So all that huge number of data points we showed came from a mixture of what were your original permanent sample sites, and there were 5 of them, plus all these additional, what we're calling transition sample sites. And so there's those 2 categories of monitoring that are ongoing. That will all convert to permanent sample sites or sample stands. We're using the words interchangeably. The stands are these permanent pieces of equipment that will be installed that are, with a lock that only utility staff. That's an actual sample stand versus sample site might be a hose bib or a meter or a hydrant or some other type of a location. All of that, by July, I think DOH is going to, those should be installed. The 9 new permanent plus your 5 gets you to 14 permanent sample stands.
Thank you. And the second question that I ended up having was, in the report, there's a reference to flushing of the remaining pipe, and it says the majority of all remaining pipe in the system have also been flushed. Could you end up by better quantifying what majority? I mean, is it closer to 50%? Is it closer to 100%? And is there even a goal in terms of how much is supposed to be flushed?
Yeah, okay, I could take a shot at that, and then, Terry, you can correct me. And that might have been some loose terminology. When the event happened, the goal was to, what we were calling flush, but it was really to turn over all the water in the system in case there was any contaminated water. And you can see from the fact that all the dead ends have come up, and the transition sites and the Big Island Life Survey, 112 sites, everything's come up, gave us the impression that those original molecules of water that had contained all been purged. So it was like, we'd call that 100% turnover of the water. Whether that was achieved through them purposely flushing or just water demand or water use, the goal has been achieved there. Now the city has its own routine flushing program where you could explain that, Terry, where you...
Yes, good evening, Terry Smith, Utilities Manager. We have an ongoing program for our water main flushing program. It has been placed on hold, unfortunately, because of all of our other involvement with the project that we're underway with. We have probably done 5% of what we consider the north end flushing, which is from 44th Street to the north end of the island, since the event. We've done other flushing as needed when we're out taking our other samples, when we see our target values less than 1 milligram per liter appear. So that type of flushing has continued on. However, we haven't had the opportunity to get out and get the other areas flushed that we would like to at this point.
You might mention what a typical cycle is, though.
We've split our system into halves. It's basically 60-40, to be honest. The south end of the island is larger, and we do it 1 year. The north end the other year. In conjunction with that, we do all of the dead ends each year. So there is a pretty aggressive flushing program compared to what we have seen with other utilities.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Dan?
So, just so I understand where we're going on this, right now, we're stuck at 1% chlorine, or the 1 milligram chlorine, until we figure out some way, whether through swabbing, pigging, new pipes, whatever, to address the 2/3 chlorine loss that we've got from the pipe walls. I think if I could summarize in a nutshell where you're
if I could just clarify that, you're at the 1 milligram per liter until all these risks have been eliminated and you're doing surveillance monitoring. Once you've checked all those boxes, the Department of Health does not require, you don't need to be boosting anymore. But that could take a year.
Okay, so that's good to hear. So what is that? So let's say we're a year from now and we finish the
All the vaults are retrofitted, your cross-connection control program has been improved, and the citizens are on board, and...
So then do we move the red line down to 0.5, or...
You would be allowed to.
Okay, but that's our decision, and the Health Department won't have any objections to that.
And they're going to want data-driven decisions, so that's where the surveillance monitoring's got to be going.
So but then so if we move it down to 0.5, that means we have to make sure that we have enough chlorine in the reservoirs to keep the level of 0.5 throughout the entire system. So you're going to get obviously more than 0.5 somewhere closer to the reservoirs, and then as you drop farther away. So at least the red line gets down to 0.5 or whatever the number is.
And it could gradually go down over time as you make more progress cleaning mains. Maybe you can lower it because there's less demand out in the system. So there'll be a trade-off, but you won't be required to maintain it above 1 once these other risks are eliminated.
But the 4 things you mentioned, the pigging, the swabbing, that's all sort of the next step beyond
Yeah,
that.
yeah, what we want to do in the next few months is evaluate flushing. Can we get more bang for the buck out of flushing? Right, because that's the least expensive approach, and your crews already know how to do it. And if not, there will be a menu of options for you to consider, and you'll combine that with your CIP program. It'll be a longer-term evaluation, but in the meantime, you're trying to eliminate all these risks and get more information on the chemistry and stability of the distribution system, and then you're just like, you are like, and I would say, worlds above and better than most other utilities in the nation.
Jane and then Benson.
Well, I just the other day had somebody come and ask me, when can we get rid of the smell of the chlorine in the water? So you answered the question. It could be a year when we've done all this, or
Yep.
maybe longer. Is a year best case scenario?
Well, based on the schedule for the vault retrofits, that should be completed by the end of the year. Cross-connection control, there's policy decisions, and then there's on-the-ground surveys, inspections, devices, testing. So there's different pieces of that I don't know that the time horizon is for getting those pieces done. And we're not really involved in that piece anyway.
Okay. No, thank you.
But gives you motivation to get through it.
Thank you.
Benson?
Yeah, I actually have a couple of questions. As far as, assuming we get past we've addressed all the risks, and now we're not required to maintain the 1.0 level. Is there a recommended level? I mean, we had it at 0.5. Is that sort of the standard level right now that other municipalities use?
Very system-specific recommendations, but certainly there are criteria you can compare yourself against in terms of what is considered optimized, and that would be, 95% of the samples collected at worst-case locations are greater than 0.2 95% of the time. So there are numbers and benchmarks out there. I'm not saying 0.2 is adequate or acceptable, but if you have a detectable residual at your worst-case locations, you're doing better than most. If you have 0.5 everywhere, even at your dead ends, you're doing great.
Okay.
For a free chlorine system, chloraminated systems like Portland, they have higher targets. It's a different disinfectant residual, so it's like really system-specific, and you have to be careful. If you see a number out there in the literature, it may not be for your type of residual.
Fair enough. Actually, a question addressed to Kirsten. I thought getting the letter regarding what's going on as far as the what the city's doing was very helpful. So going forward, how are we going to keep the community informed of what we're doing as far as the addressing the water issue? Is there an ongoing...
Actually, I think Glenn can answer that best, but...
Yeah, the letter was intended to be the overview. And following this up, we'll have a series of communications that deal more with cross-connection control and why it matters. Some of those will be targeted to more specific audiences, but we'll start going from the big picture down to that area of risk. And along with that, we'll keep people posted what we're doing with the vaults and other things.
Is that kind of information now available on our website, on the city's website?
It's getting there.
Is it getting it? Okay. I think that'd be helpful, just to make sure that we keep up informed.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Melinda. Thank you very much, Terry. And Glenn, we've come a long way from where we were in panic mode and dealing with the boil water advisory last year. And it's great to see all the work that's been done. It gives certainly me a lot of confidence. I think our public should have a lot of confidence that the work that's doing makes a lot of sense and is smart work to be doing. So thank you very much for that. We, at this point, council members, you want 10 minutes? So we'll start at 7:06. We're in recess.
I know.
Game on, as Ally says. We've completed. We have come to the end of a study session, taken a couple minutes break, and we come to our regular meeting for Monday, March 30th, 2015. Welcome to that. Ally, could you call the order? Call the roll, please.
I'm going to call the roll in order. Councilmember Benson Wong. Here. Councilmember Debbie Bertlin. Here. Councilmember Mike Serro.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Dan Grouse.
Here.
Mayor Bruce Bassett.
Here.
Councilmember Joel Walks.
Here.
Councilmember Jane Meyer Brown.
All right, thank you very much for that. Let's see, a couple of changes to our agenda this evening. The first is that our executive session has been canceled, so we will go home a little bit earlier than we were thinking we would. But on the other end of things, we will add an agenda item at the beginning of regular business, which we will title City Council Town Center Parking Subcommittee Bus Intercept and Sound Transit Funding Update, just so that it's a nice, tight, short title. And that Ally announced this afternoon. I'm sorry for the late notice on that, but we will add that into this meeting this evening. Okay, with those two changes, we come to appearances, an opportunity for anybody to address the council on any issue they may wish to. You have 3 minutes. Please begin by introducing yourself and giving us your address. General rules are just please be civil. Welcome.
Hi there, Cynthia Winiski, 2750 68th Ave Southeast. So I hear this conversation's going on about parking. Let's get in a time capsule. In 2002, at the City Council retreat, the City Council acknowledged that, quote, while any use of sound transit funds for parking prohibits them from making island-only parking, and at this site, which is the current park and ride, the likelihood that off-islanders would park at this downtown site was considerably less. And then let's take another time travel to 2003. The City Council discussed the rationale for dropping its request of Sound Transit to provide Mercer-only parking spaces, and was briefed on the increase in number of citizen complaints and threats of legal action regarding safety issues and traffic violations. That's about it that says there. And then, really, from 2003 until this year, we've been asking where's our parking. And now that I've looked through the building codes, front to back to front several times, and how it's affected the current developments and all the parking spaces that we've not required that we could have from the current developments, I can't believe we're here. It's sort of like brings to question what's going on. All right, that's all. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Welcome, Michelle.
Good evening. Michelle Goldberg, 2212 78th Avenue Southeast. I just talked with Mayor Bassett outside about a couple things, but I'm going to repeat them for everyone's benefit. I think it's not any surprise to people that the bus intercept system is an issue about which many islanders have expressed concern. And so I was kind of surprised and disappointed to see the last-minute agenda item that says that the council will be discussing the bus intercept system and sound transit funding. If it is going to be for informational purposes only, then perhaps that could have been included in the city clerk's email to everyone so that there wouldn't be unnecessary alarm. So if you are not going to be making a decision tonight, everyone would appreciate knowing that so that they don't have to then start their email chain and say, did you know that they're going to be discussing this tonight? It's an important issue. A lot of us have expressed concern, and I was meeting with Councilmember Locks earlier today, and he had no idea that this was coming on the agenda. So I've also read the attachment for tonight's meeting, and I'm concerned about certain language that implies that the $6.3 million mitigation fund is necessarily tied to the bus intercept. I will read now, there's a March 4th Mercer Island Reporter article in which it cites, there's a citation of Noel Treat's January letter to Sound Transit, and this is, I'm quoting the article. I don't actually know which parts are taken out from the letter. In light of our discussion, I am writing to strongly re-emphasize that the city intends to hold firm to the parties' long-standing agreement. Sufficient funds must be contributed by Sound Transit towards new parking capacity as mitigation for the city's loss of mobility, Treat wrote. A bus intercept has never been and cannot now be a condition of this mitigation. So I'm not sure if this means that looking at tonight's attachment, whether the city has changed its attitude toward this idea of the mitigation fee being tied now to the bus intercept. It's my understanding that the $6.3 million has always been for a certain loss of mobility of the center lanes. So you can't use that same city mitigation money and now say, oh, by the way, we're now going to use it to add a parking lot. Or rather a bus intercept. It's like negotiating to buy a car and then saying at the last minute, oh, give me your car and now give me a second car. Two different items, they should not be combined. They're two different agreements. From an environmental viewpoint, I'm opposed to the bus intercept system. There should not be a fleet of buses running across the East Channel Bridge, choking up an already crowded freeway on I-90. And I have other issues, but I'm opposed to the bus intercept system. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I can see the woman from Hawaii.
Aloha, Meg.
Thank you. Meg Lippert, 4052 94th Avenue Southeast. Aloha from Hawaii. I planned my trip back today to arrive at 4:30, so I wouldn't miss this council meeting.
Oh, wow.
And so
That's going above and beyond to be here.
I'm passionate about the library. Changing the topic for a minute. As you know, I bring the Ohana spirit from Hawaii. Does anybody know what Ohana means? Okay, it means family in Hawaii, and that's what I believe we are here on Mercer Island, a family working together, a big family and an important family. And I am delighted to report that the new director of KCLS, for those of you who don't know, is Gary Wasden. He came on in January, and he has said that everything is of the old plans for renovating and closing our library for a year are off the table, and he is, quote, starting from scratch, end quote. So I wanted to just remind everybody here and everybody listening on television tonight that we got this wonderful email from Mr. Wasden today saying that in order to clear the decks and start afresh, a survey has been developed, which we have also piloted, the Concerned Citizens piloted, and it is online now. There are small signs, as Mr. Wasden says, posted in the library near the computers and circulation desk to remind people. Postcards have been sent out and should be arriving any day now, promoting a meeting on April 23rd, a public meeting for everybody to talk about the library and what we hope to see in terms of updates. And they are working on a larger email blast that should go out later this week, and they've already posted on Facebook. So this is a really concerted effort, and now it's our job to step up and respond to this survey. So although, as Mr. Lawson says, already they have over 50 responses, and some other people in this room have responded, and if you have responded, could you raise your hand? I just want to get a count. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good. 4 of us already responded. So here's a little crib sheet for those of you who are here. I prepared, and I also have this reminder, and I'm just going to share it with you. This is the website, www.kcls.org/MI survey. So you might think MI stands for Mercer Island, but I think it stands for MI. So I hope everybody takes the responsibility to be responsible about filling out the survey. And I brought my prop, my KCLS library book I'm reading right now. And if you have one too, you know how important the library is to us in maintaining it, updating it, and keeping it open.
What's the book there, Meg?
The Warmth of Other Suns. It's wonderful. It's about migration from the south to the north. Thank you very much.
Meg, thanks very much for promoting this. It's something everybody should do, and thank you very much for taking the time to come back and be at this meeting from what must have been a great vacation. So thank you.
This is my daughter, so thank you
It
very
looks
much.
like
And thank
Tommy's
you guys for
actually with
being
you
here.
there, the way
Yeah.
you're dressed.
Yeah, this is my Jimmy Buffett shirt. Anyways, I'm out there, 24270 4th Avenue Southeast. Wasn't planning on being here. I was out in my garden until about 26 minutes ago, and I was advised that I should come down. Anyways, I've said this before, but we're all running a business here, and I feel a lot of times like we aren't managing a business. Everything's reactionary. The fact that we're putting something on an agenda at 3:30 in the afternoon rather than having a schedule that looks out 8 weeks. I mean, you guys own our city. You own our island. You need to get with staff and put together a plan so people can plan to be here when they need to be here, because Sound Transit's sense of urgency or their lack of planning does not constitute an emergency on our part. If this was a small business, we'd be out of business. But anyways, I just want to read this letter because I'm not sure that it actually was forwarded as I asked. But council members, TCLG members, and staff, the purpose of this email is twofold, as noted below. One, to reinforce Mercer Island residents have overwhelmingly messaged they do not want increased density, overdevelopment, or mid-rise buildings downtown, and to encourage the City Council to further slow down the push for development, and two, to document why I raised my hand in support of buildings up to 5 stories. This was shared at the Town Center stakeholder meeting, but I was asked to make sure that the City, the Design Commission, and the Planning Commission were all aware of it. So there was an informal vote taken at the last stakeholder meeting where City Council lended hands, and I've been asked to qualify that myself and many of us who raised our hands to support building developments over 2 stories are formally documented. The qualifiers that were brought up at the voting time and throughout the meeting were things like, if a site goes above 2 stories, there would need to be a comprehensive definition around what major site improvements are and what significant public amenities entail. The definitions would need to bring extraordinary value to the island. Some examples and considerations are below. I'm not going to read through them because there are a lot, but I'll give them a letter. These qualifiers are especially important given that the majority of the island does not support density overbuilding and so forth. And I'm looking at the clock, so I'm not going to read the whole thing just to respect the time. But at the end of the day, whether you went to MIPA or West Mercer or Lake Ridge, and even at the Town Center stakeholder group, people don't want it. The other thing is there are so many moving pieces right now, we can't make a decision. The moratorium is a timeout. We need a timeout with Sound Transit. If they can't manage a budget and manage a schedule and manage a plan, we don't need to react to it. We need a timeout with them too. So I'd encourage you strongly to put our interests in front of Sound Transit's, to think about what we're doing, and not react to this latest bus intercept thing. I have emails going back 3 months with Noel Treat asking to be kept in the loop, and it was surprised, and I had a couple of courtesy heads up from folks earlier, but absolutely astonished that it's on the agenda tonight. And that is just deplorable. When you have somebody that is like myself and these folks here that outreach regularly and beg the City Council and the staff for information, you feel like you're hoodwinked. And I want to help you guys. I want to help the island. And so I'll give this letter and packet to the folks behind me, but please help us. We want to help you, but it's not getting very easy to do this. And so the only other thing I'll add is I went down to Larkspur and Marin County. You wouldn't believe how organized they are and how they fought to protect their community. I went to Larkspur, Tiburon, Belvedere, and a lot of other places. Their neighborhoods are a lot like ours, and we need to fight to protect it. So, thank you.
Thank you. Ira, welcome.
Thank you, Bruce. I'm against the bus dump. I've been involved in this process for at least 15 years. Back in 2000, when we were increasing the size of the park and ride and talking about the station, we were promised that the council would protect us against this crowding of more vehicles coming onto the island, and even talking about a bus dump is not protecting us. I'm against the Sound Transit parking at the King Hines property. It's far too far away. Years ago, Sound Transit, this is again around 2000, Sound Transit looked at the ability to use the Mercer, which is half the distance for parking before the Mercer was built. And Sound Transit sent a letter to the city saying that the Mercer was too far away, and this would be at least 2 times that. I think that I object to pretending that this parking has anything to do with increasing our mobility or for increasing transit mobility. It's just way, way too far away. People need to go down there to the Heinz property, Heinz King property, and see how long it would be. I mean, you're usually going to transit, rushing to get to transit, and now you're going to be a half a mile away. Nobody's going to do that, and it rains around here too, which people tend to forget when they're looking at these programs. On the second topic, the town center visioning is speeding towards the mistakes of the past. I've asked many times, but the city's refused to look at what went wrong before, and I think they're against looking at it because they know that this is the process that leads to the bad result, and that's why the city's following it. The public has said again and again, at least a significant portion of the public, that they don't like five-story buildings, but as Tom mentioned, the city asked the stakeholders group whether they were for five-story buildings, and almost all of them raised their hands. I think it was probably somewhere between 75 and 85%, which goes to show, which goes to prove what I've said in the past, that the stakeholders don't represent the island in any way. They're way away from it. They mainly represent the property owners. And so, as I've suggested before, the city needs to do a lot more surveying and actual public involvement. They haven't done that yet, but pretending that the stakeholders represent anybody, I think, is completely false, and hopefully Islanders will see through that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, without closed public comments, we'll move to consent calendar. We have payables, payroll, and Agenda Bill 5059, 2015-2016 Fire Collective Bargaining Agreement. Is there a motion to accept the consent calendar?
I'd like to pull the fire contract off the consent calendar.
Okay. Leaving us with payables and payroll. Is there a motion?
I move it to approve the consent calendar.
All in favor, signify by saying, thank you. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We'll go to...
minutes? We're going to approve minutes?
Oh, yeah, I just skipped right over that, didn't I? Thank you. Maybe that's why everybody paused. Yes. Well, we've done consent calendar, and we've got, we'll go to the collective bargaining after.
Did we vote on the consent calendar?
We did.
You voted against it.
All right, back to minutes. My apologies. Regular meeting minutes of February 23rd, 2015.
I move to approve the City Council regular meeting minutes of February 23rd, 2015.
Second.
All right. Any concerns, changes? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, motion carries. Now we'll go to Agenda Bill 5059, 2015-2016 Fire Collective Bargaining Agreement. Chris, you want to tee up, or you want to have Dan talk about why he pulled it?
I can just tee up real quickly.
Okay.
If you want to, you're welcome to. I just had a couple of minor points. Just, I think somehow, Chris, there's a typo, and I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but on the MOU in Section 1, Paragraph B, the reference to Article 29 should actually be Article 28. It's weird, because on the prior draft you gave us, it was 29, and then somehow it changed to 28 on...
Yeah, what happened was some last-minute formatting before the agenda bill was prepared, and just a lot of different eyes looking at the contract, going through it, making sure to catch typos and grammar. We caught some article misnumbering, and it got fixed in one document and not the other. And so I think what happened was the MOU...
It's fine. I'm just pointing out that the MOU that's on the agenda bill still says 29.
Yeah, we will be able to correct that after, provided you approve the contract.
So the only question I still have is the relationship between Article 27, Section 2 of the contract and Section 1C of the MOU. So if people would go, it's page 18 of the agenda bill. Where it talks about the city may, for cause, require a physician's statement when a employee goes on sick leave. And then you get to the MOU in section 1C where it says when a member uses 5 or more consecutive shifts of sick leave, he will be required to provide the city with a note from his doctor verifying the illness, but only one verification note per extended absence will be supplied. And I've asked you this before, and I just don't understand why we even added that, because it raises at least in my mind, playing lawyer for a second, it raises the question of whether we can continue to invoke our rights under Section 2 to require a note for sick leave, or whether somehow this new language in the MOU takes away that right. So if, for example, someone is out for 2 shifts, are we now prevented from saying we want you to give a doctor's note? Or if someone's out for 10 shifts and we got a doctor's note after 5, this would suggest we can never ask for it after we've asked for one of them, when in the old contract it seemed to say we could just keep asking for them for cause.
Right.
So I'm just not certain why we would have done that.
I can speak to that. So the language that's in the contract right now, the for cause, is actually, there's been a fair amount of contention around that between the management and the union. And the management has not been successful in defining, in coming to an agreement about what for cause means. So, for example, for cause, as if you look at it in the past and how we've dealt with it, it meant, and we've had to do this very rarely, it meant that something was going on that shouldn't. So maybe some possible leave abuse. And so therefore the for cause is bordering on disciplinary action. So it has never meant that we could, just because we want to substantiate your absence, we need a doctor's note. We will not. We've been told by our attorney and outside labor attorneys that that's not going to fly with that for cause language, just to verify an absence. So therefore, this language in the MOU became very important to us because we want to be able to do our due diligence in knowing that an extended absence is supported by a physician. And so we felt that was, we fought pretty hard for that language, and we were actually very happy and feel like that got us strides to where we were going that we didn't get with the for cause language. Now it does, just because the language in the MOU still doesn't prevent us from asking for a doctor's note for cause. We believe we may still be getting a disagreement with the union about what for cause is, but we believe that if we were in the position where we felt like, or we were worried that there was some sort of abuse going on, that we could, under that clause, still ask for a doctor's note. So one of your example about you come back in 5 shifts, and under the MOU you have to provide a doctor's note. But 10 shifts from now, we don't think what's going on is really going on. We have some outside information that says you're not using your sick leave, or you're golfing when your back was out. That's for cause and would allow us to then seek another doctor's note, we believe.
Okay. That's all I had.
All right. Is there a motion then? Dan, do that.
I move to approve the fire collective bargaining agreement and memorandum of understanding with the Mercer Island Fire Union for the period of January 1, 2015 through December 31, 2016, and authorize the city manager to sign same.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Chris, thank you very much. Okay, that will bring us to our newly added agenda item, and I'll say just a few words here first about this. So it's not ideal adding an agenda item late. We went back and forth on whether it was worth doing that or not worth doing that. And Michelle makes a good point. It would have saved some heartburn if I had asked Ally to include in her email that this was really going to be an informational item intended to inform the council and to begin a public conversation, not a decision-making point. And so my apologies to those who did get concerned that this might be a moment of decision-making and that they needed to leave their garden or wherever else they might have been in order to be here this evening. That was certainly not the intent. To those who are watching on TV and might be interested in this item and not sure what the memo is that we're referring to, staff has done a quick job of posting it and making it available online. So if you're watching us on television and you'd like to see it, you can go to mercergov.org/busrail. And from there, you will find two things of interest. First of all, you'll find a link to the memo where at the top of the page it says, click here to read the March 30, 2015 memo. And below that, even better, which I hadn't thought to ask for, but staff did it, is submit comments. So there's also a link there that allows one to submit comments about the memo if they are so inclined. So thank you very much to staff for responding quickly and making that possible. With that, I've asked the Deputy Mayor if he could just run us through the content of this, because I know the council hasn't had a chance to digest this yet. And so I'm going to do that, and then we'll go to questions. Unless, Mike, you want to do something?
I do, kind of. And, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate you, you got a lot of stuff going on right here. But I just want to say my 2 cents, get off my chest, if you will, about the process. And that has to do with the OPMA, Open Public Meeting Act. I made my feelings known to the mayor. I was disappointed on the Open Public Meeting Act. So 99.9% of the time we abide by the Open Public Meeting Act. It's that, I forgot what I said, the 1% of the time or the 0.5% of the time when it becomes difficult, that's when it's critical that the Open Public Meeting Act. And I believe that the actions following the Tuesday Sound Transit Mercer Island Community Center meeting, the actions follow that violate the OPMA, and I'd just like for the council to kind of think about it and do the best they can in being very sensitive to OPMA and recognizing that actionable items are defined very broadly, very, very broadly in the OPMA. And if the purpose of follow-on meetings was to develop collective commitment, which I think being familiar with the system, it was, then we're in violation of OPMA. Can't do anything about it now, but going forward, the city's coming to a lot of important and what I know will be challenging issues. We want to be extra diligent and sensitive on how does it say in OPMA that we as public servants do not have the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is not good for them to know.
I'm going to jump in here, actually, and I have to tell you, Councilman Brasero, I take great offense to that. You and I did speak, and I'm going to tell the rest of the council, too. All the actions taken after that Tuesday meeting were completely in compliance with the OPMA. There's an absolute recognition that there's a balance that has to be struck between effective communication between the council and then what's provided to the public. This council has been diligent about not violating the OPMA, about trying to be as open and transparent as possible and try to convey effective information without keeping anyone in the dark, which is what is always asked for. There's nothing that occurred that is in violation of the OPMA, and a layman's opinion about it does not rise to an actual violation. There was no action taken. There's no request for action taken. it's just really unfathomable to me that you would stand up there and say that. I think you're just doing that for political purposes, quite frankly. The council acted correctly. The intent was to provide information and try to get it as quickly to the council as possible, which is always the request. There's a million different ways to do it. The fact that this was all sped up so that the public could hear about it, the biggest problem we had was there was an important meeting that was had, and we recognized that we had the packet out already, that we had to make sure other council members were kept aware where things were at, and that the next council meeting is on April 20th. So to be effective business people, you have to be able to make decisions and stuff quickly, but there was never any intent to make any decisions outside the public purview. There was no action taken. There was no meeting that occurred. And this council, of many councils I've worked with, is probably the best about policing themselves or checking with me. So I think you're absolutely wrong on that.
Thank you for your patience, Mr. Mayor.
So, Debbie?
I do think, I know that Deputy Mayor Grouse is going to go through some of the content here, but I think that it is important. I think there's genuine concern for how this came forward and why it came forward so suddenly. And the extent to which you're comfortable, I would just like to make a few comments to that effect.
That's fine.
Yeah. And because I take to heart the comment, that the one phrase I hear quite often, and I probably use fairly often in my job at work, is don't expect your lack of planning to turn into my crisis. And I can fully understand why that might be one interpretation of what we see here. To the point that Katie just made, it was about legitimately agile business decision making. When we looked at the fact that the next the next council meeting is April 20th, there's 3 weeks between now and then, and the decision was, do we follow sort of the traditional, and I would almost call it somewhat bureaucratic, timeframes of getting everything out there, getting it packets, getting it on the website, etc., or do we do something fairly quickly based on the fact that information unfolded to us fairly quickly as well, that at least I, on my part, felt better to get it out there sooner, perhaps not with as much foreplanning as we would normally like, than to slow down and turn the process into more of a bureaucratic morass. So respecting people's concern, I think Bruce made a great point. I too would have been smart had I suggested that we put in there that it's not an actionable or vote-taking initiative here, but that this is coming out. The intent was to get it out there sooner rather than later. We respect that this was probably an adrenaline rush for a number of people that we wouldn't have intended, but we do hope legitimately that as we go through the content here, that we're able to get the conversation going, not only through this room, through the broader community, through the stakeholder community, et cetera, but there's really important stuff here that is very intertwined and very interdependent. And just as in the context of I-90 tolling, I've always been impressed with the intelligence of our community, and I'm looking for the intelligence of the community to come to play as we try to parse and sort and sequence and everything else. So both an apology and an explanation, I think, on my part.
Thank you. To you, Dan.
This is the most exciting thing I've heard yet, so this has been great. As people have already alluded to, this is for informational purposes, and a lot of it is that people have been asking us for some time now, well, what's going on with bus intercept? Because I think it was probably back in December or January where Sound Transit made the presentation showing version 5, was it, or option 5, that where it showed the 80th Avenue option, and it's pretty much been quiet ever since then. And the reality is that the city has been pressing Sound Transit ever since then to get more information, and continues to do so, because we've recognized from the outset that we cannot have an intelligent discussion either at the council or within the community until we have more information on bus intercept. So what part of the purpose of this was just to lay out for the council and for the public what the city is doing in terms of what kind of information it has been asking for, and what kind of information Sound Transit has promised that it's going to provide. So we remain committed to obtaining this information, and it's in the bullet point list that is on the bottom of the first page. The second part is the commuter parking, and just to clarify, in response to Michelle's public comment, the $6.3 million, this council has been clear right from the outset, the $6.3 million is based upon the 2004 amendment to the MOU. It says nothing whatsoever to do with the bus intercept. The $6.3 million was on the table before the words bus intercept ever existed, and the council has been very clear, including, I believe, in the email that Tom was referring to from the city to Sound Transit, that we will not even consider any reneging on the $6.3 million, regardless of what happens with bus intercept. So the issue has always been, okay, so now we have bus intercept potentially. What are the consequences of that, and what additional mitigation should the city demand if we're going to accept bus intercept? And again, it's a two-part question, because we don't know whether to accept bus intercept until we know what bus intercept is, but part of that decision will ultimately depend upon what additional mitigation the city has offered. So does it work operationally, and is there sufficient additional mitigation? This council has made it clear since the first time we ever considered bus intercept that the only way we would ever consider bus intercept is if it goes hand in hand with some sort of addressing of the commuter parking problem for Islanders. And that was an early decision this council made, and we've never wavered from that decision. And we've made it clear to Sound Transit that that's a bright line for us in terms of making sure that we address the commuter parking problem as part of any resolution to as part of any consideration of bus intercept. So what this report is trying to do, it reaffirms that the thing that's been thrown in the equation now, which is sort of, and it's, I heard what Tom also said about, Sound Transit's delays or failure to plan shouldn't be caused us to change our situation. Unfortunately, we also have the Heinz project, which is sitting there, and it is forcing is the wrong word, that its schedule is such that if we are going to consider that as a site for commuter parking, it plays into this whole situation, and that's what this report is trying to address, that the Heinz is saying how much money is Sound Transit / Mercer Island prepared to put on the table to pay for the parking. We can't answer that question until we know what's going on with bus intercept, because bus intercept ties into the money. So the whole purpose of this report is to try to show how this all fits together, and what city staff and the town center parking committee feel is the potential sequence of events to bring this all together. And then there's a couple of things at the bottom of the report, just are issues that we wanted to make sure the council and the public was aware of. I think we're all cognizant of the fact that starting in 2017, we're going to enter a 6-year period where it's going to be very difficult on I-90. There will be no light rail. We'll just have the outside roadway. We'll have one extra lane, but it's going to be a difficult time. And so we are trying to make sure that Islanders who would be willing to take a bus have the ability to do so, and that includes making sure we have sufficient bus capacity and seeing if there's any way of helping Islanders who are not in the town center to get a shuttle or some sort of other means for getting to the north end if they want to take a bus. So that's what the last several points are directed towards. With that, questions?
Yes, thank you. So we'll go to council questions about this. Benson.
I appreciate the work of the subcommittee. I guess I know things are happening, unfolding very quickly, maybe too quickly, certainly for the public, and so encourage the more information we can push out there, the better for the process. One thing that wasn't really discussed too much was this April 23rd deadline So what is this baseline? Do we know anything about this? And, I mean, it almost sounds like it's some sort of deadline that is being pushed on us, and if that's what it is, we need to know.
Okay. So, Benson, thanks for highlighting that. And this is something that Light Rail cognoscenti would probably have known, but something that we did not know. And the baseline is a moment in a project where the board, as we understand it, effectively sets, and I'm just reading here, the scope, schedule, and budget for the entire project. And it just was dropped on us a couple weeks ago, by Sound Transit that this moment was coming. So we had been unaware of that moment in the process until just recently. And what we quickly realized was that if indeed they're setting scope, schedule, and budget, they have to be making assumptions about what's happening here on Mercer Island. And yet we have not had the discussions with them yet to figure out what's happening here. So the concern that immediately raised is there's a presumption on their part as to what outcome they're going to have, that they should not have that presumption. And so what we've done is push back and say, you can't go there without having this conversation with us, and clearly it's unlikely we can reach any kind of a conclusion by April 23rd. And therefore, what we're saying is we believe that your way through is going to be to create quite a large box and say the answer is someplace within this realm. It's either do something other than bus intercept, or it's bring more like $10 to $12 million to the table and some of these other things that we are asking for, or you're going to be sideways with us, and the baseline will have led you astray. Dan, Debbie, you want to? So, Benson, does that help?
It does. I have more questions.
Okay.
Just a point of clarification. When Noel sent the email, or maybe it was a letter to Sound Transit asking for clarification about mitigation money, did he get a response?
He didn't get a written response.
He got some response.
He got a
verbal response about the mitigation money, which it was 2 pots of money.
I think he got a verbal response saying, the reason he wrote that email was because Don Billen had made a comment during a phone conversation suggesting somehow the $6.3 million was tied to bus intercept. And he, for the very reason that Michelle had pointed out, wanted to dispel them of any notion that being the case. So that's why he wrote the email. So we were on the record of making clear that $6.3 million had nothing to do with bus intercept.
So it had everything to do with the center lane.
Yeah, and that was the purpose of the email. We didn't expect a response to that, but just we wanted to be on the record.
Back to Benson, and then to Mike.
Okay, so we're, obviously people are beginning to posture. Okay, so I guess I want to make sure that our communication with Sound Transit, with Metro, is documented in writing, and that, we're going to have to make our paper trail. I just want to make sure that we get our ducks in order, okay, because I don't want to rely on conversations by phone or, for instance, one of my peeves right now is that on this baseline thing, not knowing what alternatives Sound Transit has looked at, and I know we've asked them to provide information to us in writing. I think we have. I know we've asked NO to basically make that request. Although I know I've asked NO to basically get from Sound Transit something in writing that confirms their position that they cannot allow, they can't dedicate parking for Mercer commuters. I don't know. I've never seen anything in writing. So I encourage our staff to get things in writing, make sure things are in writing, and let's follow up. Now, having said, that's my peeve, okay? So the thing that I also am concerned about, I want to know if we've started doing legal research on what our rights are vis-a-vis Sound Transit and stopping the bus intercept. And I don't know, have we started that legal research?
I can tell you that actually one of the things we've done, given my transition here in the next few months, We have Scott Johnson, who's working with the city. He's already done other work with us too, so we have outside counsel who's working on that right now. He's working with the city with regard to that.
Mike.
Hey, Mr. Mayor, so I was listening to NPR today, and there's a British diplomat who characterized the Iranian nuclear talks, instead of being a written contract, they've gone from being written contracts to unwritten narratives, and that's what it reminds me of working with Sound Transit. And I would just want to reiterate what Councilmember Long said. I was at a brief with Deputy Mayor Wallace, and he's just livid about the unwritten narratives that for mitigation that they've received from Sound Transit, and I just kind of warn the subcommittee that it's got to be written down, because we're 22,000, Bellevue is 600,000 plus, and they do not, even with that muscle, huh? Or actually, the whole east side, 100,000, you're right, the whole east side is 600,000. But they're getting the runaround, if you will, from Sound Transit. And I also bring back, during the day with the Sound Transit meeting, they briefed Rotary, and again, they spin it with the traffic count on a 24-hour traffic count, which is completely misrepresents the issue that we're going to have, i.e. evaluating during the peaks, morning and evening. And that they continue to brief that bus traffic goes down on the 24-hour count versus the baseline here, where there's almost a 5-fold increase during AM, PM on 80th, gives you a feel for what you're working with or against, Mr. Mayor. Also, what's not in here, and I know it's a bit of WashDOT, but clarifying SOV access on the HOV when R8A takes effect. It's very important, and we've been at one meeting where we've got two different responses on that issue. Thank you.
So to your last point first, I know as part of our work plan, we asked staff to re-engage with WashDOT in the early part of this year and get us another go-round at having them answer that question.
Got to have it on paper, yeah, of course.
So if I could for a moment, just to speak forward in time, what we're imagining at this point is that
Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
That's all right. What we're imagining is that as soon as possible, we would like Sound Transit to come back to us with a public open house that presents the answers to the questions the public's raised about the bus intercept and tries to get at as many of the answers to the questions that we've raised here as possible as well. We internally had looked at the calendar and said, hey, let's do that week after next week being spring break week, the week after that being a good time to do it in advance of the 23rd, in advance of our next council meeting. Unfortunately, bouncing that off of Sound Transit, they said, well, our usual practice is to not schedule anything in less than 5 weeks from today's date, because we need to put out flyers to the public and we need to do all of our material review in advance of having a meeting. So that timing we don't think works very well in this case, obviously, and we and Sound Transit agreed that this week we will have a further conversation about whether that can be accelerated. You and the public would look for your input as to whether you would err on the side of more time and therefore more chances to remind people it's coming, or having it closer in so that it fits more with some of these other goings on. That's a bit of there's a balancing act there, and I'm not sure what the right balance is, but obviously Sound Transit errs on one side, which is give lots of time, lots of opportunity for people to be aware before the meeting actually occurs. Debbie.
When we're looking at, sort of the milestones in this plan going forward, when is the next stakeholder committee? The 42 people?
April 21st.
So, in my mind, I think that we should consider, I don't have a quick response, but it seems to me the extent to which Sound Transit comes right before or right after should be art rather than luck. Meaning we should think about what, the extent to which this is then put in front of that stakeholder committee, which I think would be a great use and opportunity for that group, the extent to which it can be fit into the agenda. I certainly think it's a priority. But to have their constructive input and thought as we go into the session with Sound Transit could be helpful, or it could be very helpful then to take what we've heard from Sound Transit and bat it around and get best next steps. So to me, that's, like I said, I don't have a recommendation right now, but I think that it needs to be looked at in terms of something other than just random scheduling. The other thing that I feel compelled to point out is that multiple times we did ask Sound Transit to be ready to provide visuals pertaining to the bus intercept, and that has been going on for a number of weeks, if not even months, in that sense. And I've been part of this team, but I'm really frustrated when they then come back and they say it's 5 weeks, because we can go back and we can look at where we have repeatedly asked them to put it on the calendar, to show us the video, etc. So I do feel that we do have the opportunity to put a little bit of pressure on them to come before us in something less than 5 weeks.
So, Debbie's raised a question, which I support the question being asked, which is, does this belong in front of the stakeholder group? And what do the members of that committee think in terms of having feedback from that group as to the future of this?
I mean, Benson and Jane probably want to weigh in also, but I would think that I think it's great to get their opinion. I think we'd have to schedule an extra session to do it. The April 21st is already pretty much going to be jammed up, but I think it's perfectly appropriate to, we can get them together on the 21st and try to schedule something a week later, or if the group is, without making it mandatory, but as many people as can do it, because I think they are very representative of the overall community, and it would be good to get their thoughts on it. So,
I'm thinking we could perhaps do a stakeholder meeting in advance of the April 21st meeting, perhaps.
Yeah,
because we don't need Seth Harry to discuss 80th. We need to inform and get the feedback from those folks. And there's quite a bit of time from one stakeholder. This is a big gap. So we might be able to gather a meeting of the stakeholders.
Yeah, if we can get the information from Sound Transit and Metro. I mean, people need to understand that this information is coming from two separate governments. Sound Transit provides the visuals and Metro provides the operational parameters. And we're still waiting on both of them. I do want to comment on Benson's point about doing things in writing. There have been numerous emails that Noel has sent to Sound Transit making our position clear. So I think the council has seen several of those at least, and but the committee for sure and city staff as well agrees completely that we need to document what we're doing going forward. But I also want to make clear that we have, even when Joni Earl was still available to discuss this with, we had a meeting with her down at Sound Transit's offices, and we said even back then that anything to do with bus intercept is going to have to be in writing. The operational parameters, we are not going to accept a situation where Metro says, well, we're only going to have X number of buses and trust us. That's not going to happen. So we've made it clear from day one that whatever we end up agreeing to, if we reach an agreement, it would have to be documented and very specific.
Benson, and then Kirsten, or maybe Kirsten, did you want to weigh in on the timing of meetings, or?
I think, I think it's great to, because we have the stakeholders group already formed. My hesitation is that, we need to have some information available to that group to look at. I mean, if this is all they're going to have, I'm not sure it's not sufficient. So I would definitely want to make sure that there's more information available. And I think this is such a big issue. It would be great to see if we can, again, engage the broader community. I mean, this is a big issue, and so we don't want to stop at the 42. The 42, the stakeholders may give us a sampling, but I think we just need to be able to reach out to more people.
So you're thinking open house is the right way to move forward?
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
I think in addition to.
Yeah, in addition, again, the stakeholders provide a sampling.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and the stakeholders need this information as much as possible in order to do their work of town center and tying, if there is going to be a bus intercept, tying town center planning with pedestrian access and that. So I think it's important for the work they do.
Okay. Any other comments on this topic? Debbie?
I think that Ben makes a point of that they need information. And to a certain extent, I look at this document and it's like, wow, there's a lot that's packed in there. And I think when we look at, no matter whether it's a stakeholder or it's public engagement, there's so many if-then statements in here that I think that's where, again, to use that phrase, it becomes art and science versus throw it out there on a piece of paper and let people try to draw those connections to themselves. So what I would say is, well, this is a good starting point. When we do go forward and have that public engagement again, the and context of, public house or open house and stakeholder and, whatever other forums, is we have to help draw those if-then statements out there very, very clearly so people can see that, it's a tricky one. Yeah, I think I'll just stop there. But again, I'm very much looking forward to having this out there in the public more broadly discussed, the intricacies, et cetera. I guess I am going to go back. Ira made a comment about the extent to which there was significant distance between the Heinz proposed facility and the light rail, as well as the bus stop, because bus stop's even further than where light rail will be. And this is one of the challenges I think we face with parking, commuter parking in general, and that is, previous island voices as well as the council made the decision not to put a dedicated floor of parking on the existing park and ride for a variety of reasons. There's no way to kind of undo that one. And when you look at then what the options are closer, there really aren't many. Walgreens, we all know we explored Walgreens. It might come back to the surface again. It might not, but what I say is Heinz perfect as a location? No. We would all love it to be closer, but then I say, what's better? What do we have that's better, that's reasonably close in time frame, that will help address a significant problem we have, not only for commuter parking, but as some people are also saying in terms of just general access to the town center. I'm all ears for additional possible locations, but right now that's a real tough one that we face now, and I think we're going to consistently face as we go forward. Even if it's 200 at Heinz, that's just a part of probably what we need when it comes to what the potential for light rail traffic from Mercer Island for island residents is in the future. So again, I'm all ears for additional sites that are closer.
The South Luther Burbank Park is right there, right now, ready to use as a test case.
And you're going to walk there in heels and a skirt, and I'm going to be with you.
I did say that, didn't I?
You did say that, and you know what? It's not dark and rainy as much. And I'm looking for, what is it, a size 11 men's pair of high heels?
Okay, I'll give it back to you. I'll throw it back into your lap. That's right, 11 high heel.
Thank you. So call out to the public. Men's size...
That's no fair. That's no fair.
We will be in touch.
All right. Anyone else? Benson.
Just one last comment. I mean, first of all, I think this memo is useful in the sense that it really highlights the number of balls that are being juggled up in the air at one time. One thing that we have not talked about right now is the comments regarding the Heinz development. Okay, so I guess my only thoughts when I read this language was simply, and I'm not part of the discussions that are going on with Heinz, but I would, and so I don't know what their tone is or whatever, but I would strongly encourage the message to them would be flexible. I'm hoping this 2-month reference is not a deadline on them, by them. And so, we have a lot that's going on that may not be able to be resolved in 2 months. So I hope that there is some flexibility. So that's the message I would give to them.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
Well, that was kind of I was going to bring this up later, but with reference to Hines, I've researched some transcripts of what was said, and basically what was said was 7 different council members saying 7 different things, and Hines saying another thing. And I would hope, I don't know what we agreed on with that 15-day notification that would trip the wire for them having not fulfilled what the 7 council members said. So I have a kind of a question is, where is it documented on what the standards are that we agreed upon? We didn't agree upon anything, right?
I think that's correct. It'll be an interesting conversation on the day that they tell us that they're 2 weeks from filing a building permit.
Well,
right.
May I suggest when to front load the last meeting's minutes, and there clearly document what each council, I guess what each council member said, or what their perception of what would trip failure to fulfill an understanding.
You really confused me with the front load last meeting.
We're way behind. Okay, we're way behind on minutes. So I don't know any other way to document what was said at the meeting for us to have a record, a documentation on what was said at the meeting. And I think it was at the last council meeting where we talked about it, right?
But I think what we've just agreed, though, is that we didn't, I mean, you teed it up by saying that there isn't and wasn't a council consensus.
Well, there wasn't even a council discussion. I mean, I'm sorry.
No, I think you're right.
No, there wasn't. The council has not discussed that, and as to what would be required. Any of that will be the issue. When they give the 15-day notice, then there's going to have to be, we'll have to decide whether to have a meeting or whether to bring it up at the meeting if there's a scheduled meeting, or if not, whether to schedule a meeting. They haven't committed to what they're going to do, and we don't know, so we're saying that, we want to see what you're going to do, but I think it's been made clear to them through the 3 things that have come up time and again in our discussions about Hines have been the parking, have been the 29th Street, and have been the Whole Foods or some upscale grocery store. Those are the 3 things which have come up time and again, and those are 3 things which are referred to in the findings of fact. Beyond that, what people's notions are regarding setbacks, what people's notions are regarding floor area ratios, and any of those other things that go to the aesthetics of the project, we've clearly had no discussion about.
Okay, anyone else? All right, with that, thank you very much. We will move off of that agenda item and into our regular business. Agenda Bill 5050, Open Space Vegetation Plan, 10-year update. Paul, welcome.
Thank you. For the record, Paul West, Natural Resources Manager. I'm here tonight to present to you the 10-year open space plan update that you all have in front of you. This was something that we started a year ago, and I would like to acknowledge tonight the work of my colleagues Matt Disler and and Elaine Semigrin, who also worked on this plan, were co-authors on the plan. And especially Matt, who did all the field study for the plan and did the bulk of the writing for the plan. He's been invaluable to the product. And I'd also like to thank the open space trustees who reviewed the plan at early stages and gave us their input. And we actually had former trustees come to Open Space Trust Board meetings to weigh in on the plan in its early drafts. So thanks to them also for their work on this plan. I wanted to start off by, just go over a little bit of the history of how we got here. In 2004, the City Council directed the Parks Department to develop an open space plan after there was a failed ballot initiative to fund open space through a levy. And we then did a baseline study of the open space using graduate students to go out and look at field conditions. And we also conducted a parallel public process, which I remember the mayor was involved in quite extensively. We then came forward to the council in December and presented restoration goals and guidelines in that plan, and also presented levels of service by park. And at that time, the levels of service we proposed were the Pioneer Park was the flagship park, and that was going to get the full restoration treatment. Then there was a next group of parks which were level B service, the Mercerdale Hillside, Island Crest Park, Southeast 53rd, which were the large open space tracts. They were going to get a level of service that would basically maintain ecological function. And then there was the level of C for the rest of the parks, which were smaller, more fragmented. They would get a level of service that would prevent rapid degradation of the conditions. And I wanted to say that we did that because it was a very different environment then. There was not a consensus in the community that open space needed management. The ballot initiative that failed, showed that there was a small minority in the community that really wanted open space to be funded at a very high level, but it was very unclear where the bulk of the consensus was, and our public process helped to vet that. But we still didn't feel like we had consensus to fully provide for restoration of all our open space. So we went with this middle ground, and that's what council passed in 2004. Subsequently, the subsequent councils decided to fund at a higher level to provide level B service to all our open space. And so I'll show you later on about the history of the funding. But jumping forward, 2008, council funded, in addition to open space work, funded a Pioneer Park Forest Health Survey, which was much finer grained than our initial analysis, and provided us with lots of ecological information about Pioneer Park, and led to Pioneer Park Forest Health Plan, which we're currently following. And then same in 2008, the public passed a levy that helped give additional funding to open space work. So that brings us up to 2014. And in the last 10 years, we've planted 43,000 native trees and shrubs. We've received over 46,000 volunteer hours at 550 volunteer events. 100 acres of trees have been freed from climbing ivy. And then here's a graph showing the cumulative progress. We have 161 acres planted and 83 acres that have received cumulative. That means, or rather, comprehensive invasive removal. Comprehensive means all invasives are removed everywhere in those 78 acres, or 83 acres, excuse me. Jumping now to last year, we undertook the field study to find out where are we now. In 2004, we found that 53% of the open space was heavily invaded. We wanted to find out how much progress we made. We also wanted to look at how our strategy is doing. We actually had quite a bit of dialogue with experts in the field and internally about how could we better improve our restoration efforts, and that was part of the dialogue we had with the Open Space Trust Board as well. The study we did was, as I said, was much more extensive than what we did in 2004. We had 435 plots in all of our 300 acres of open space to look at the shrub layer, and then in addition 142 plots to look at the tree layer. And that's a quite fine-grained analysis, very similar to what we did in the Pioneer Park Forest Health Survey. This is a map showing the general kind of outline of where plots were in the Southeast 53rd open space. Results have been very positive of our progress. We have half the vegetation cover that we had 10 years ago. So here's 58% invasive cover 10 years ago. We're down to 32% now. You can see over on the left here, English ivy has dropped somewhat. It's statistically significant, but it's not as clear-cut as the cumulative. But on the other hand, Himalayan blackberry is way down. And the other major benchmark is conifer regeneration. In 2004, there was no measurable conifer regeneration in any of our open space. Conifers have a very difficult time regenerating on their own here, partly because of the lack of conifers, but partly also because of the competition. But now we have, in the places that we work, we have very strong conifer regeneration. We're talking here up to 200, 300 stems per acre. But typically across the board, we're averaging 78 trees per acre island-wide. Given all that progress, and there's lots more progress detailed in the plan document that you have in front of you, but given all that progress, we still know we have critical challenges ahead. One is that invasive trees, namely holly, are sprouting all over our open space, and right now they don't represent a lot of cover, but the potential for them to start taking over in the understory is quite enormous. And the continuing seed rain means that they spread out of the open space into other property, and that they spread from other property into the open space, and we need to get a handle on that in order to not have a holly understory at some future date. We also recognize that open space can't just continue to be managed at the level we're managing it at right now. We need to figure out a way to transition our restoration sites to a lower level of management so that they're more self-sustaining. They'll never be hands-free, but we'll be able to, in some fashion, back off the intensity that we have right now. And an entrenched problem that we never really addressed in the 2004 plan is root disease. Root disease has been well studied in Pioneer Park. We know we've got it. We know a lot about it. We don't have any good real options for controlling it. And that continues to be a problem. And then that's exacerbated by the last challenge we have, which is climate change. 2004 was pre-Al Gore and An Inconvenient Truth. Things have really changed in the last 10 years. In the last 10 years, there's a lot of new literature about how we should manage forests in the face of a 2 or 3 degree change in climate temperature over the next 100 years. And the context here is very important because we're planting trees for the 200 to 500 year time frame. We're planting long-lived conifers. We need to be making intelligent choices about what we're planting and where. So, given those challenges, we modified the program goals to some degree. The first goal originally read, maintain functional benefits of open space vegetation to the extent that available resources allow. In our public process, we had a comment that the phrase, to the extent that available resources allow, was weakened the goal statement and was also assumed in the plan. The plan is designed to have some flexibility in how much is implemented. So we struck that from the goal statement in this update. But then we also added in a new goal, which I think gets to the heart of the direction of the plan update, which is that we want to foster resilient plant communities that can recover from disturbances and adapt to climate change. And that really gets to the heart of the work that we think is needed going forward. From the 2006 Hanukkah Eve storm and the anticipated climate change, our open spaces are going to be challenged in the future, and we need to be very smart about this resiliency. And I think also the resiliency plays into that idea that we want to be able to, at some point, back off and let the ecosystem integrity play out. Given those goals, then we were asking ourselves, well, what leads to resiliency? And looking at the ecological literature, these were the characteristics that provide us those desired future conditions. They'd be primary native vegetation, high structural diversity, meaning we have densely forested areas with lots of snags and logs. We have trees of different ages, so we're not relying on one cohort of trees to carry the entire tree population forward. We have high biological diversity, so we have conifer and deciduous trees, and we have a diverse native understory. We have landscape level diversity, so we don't just have upland sites or ravine sites, but we foster the kinds of landscapes we want in different settings. But especially we want to be conserving our aquatic resources, because those in the literature are known to be the more resilient landscapes moving into a warmer, drier climate. We need healthy soils because the foundation of the plantings are the soils. And then trails and human involvement are going to be desired future conditions as well. In the 2004 plan, as I said before, we had these 3 levels of service, the level A, B, and C. We feel like the levels of service need to be rejiggered, because the level A service of complete restoration, level B service of just maintaining existing function, and C, which was, reduce the harm, don't seem to fit in this ecological framework. So we're proposing 3 new levels of service, which have some equivalency. The ecological resilience level of service would basically be implementing what I just discussed in the objectives, trying to get a stable, resilient landscape to function. Canopy retention would be a minority of the landscape area, and that would really just be areas that are too problematic to try to achieve this ecological resilience goal. And so the goal there would just be then to maintain canopy trees. And then finally, a very small portion of the open space area would be in the level of service of horticultural management. And that really means that we have like trailheads or edges of parks where we have been planting native plants to transition to a native landscape, and those need to have extra attention paid to them, because they're being managed not just for the ecological function, but also for aesthetics and park user interaction and so forth. And that would be 1 or 2% of the entire area. Moving forward, we have made a bunch of recommendations in the plan. They're based on the field study, they're based on the scientific literature, they're based on our discussions with regional experts and our dialogue with the trust board, and they're also based on the potential effects of climate change. And the first body of recommendations is just to stay the course. We've been doing native tree planting, invasive species removal, and those seem to be working. They are working, and they are also still a core part of that resiliency piece. But we're also going to be improving our restoration techniques. We know we need to be doing some summer watering to increase plant survivorship. We have some summers that are very dry, and we lose a lot of the trees, and thereby the investment that we've made if we don't water. We're going to be budgeting for additional maintenance, because the 3-year restoration cycle that we initially anticipated is not really working on many of the sites that we find that we need to do additional maintenance on the sites in years 4 and 5. We're going to be using some invasive tree injection technique, using herbicides in a very targeted fashion to control invasive trees. And then we are going to be really working on what does it mean to stabilize a site. What does it mean to have enough native plant integrity there to be able to back off and let it function on its own. And then finally, in the last part of the improvement in the plan, or the update in the plan, is this climate adaptation strategy. And the cornerstone of that is to be documenting what we're doing. So we know climate change is happening, and there's changes coming. We don't know the extent of those. There's as you go out further and further, the uncertainty increases. we can't say for sure that we're going to end up with a climate like, the Willamette Valley or some other place. It's too early to tell that. But what we can do is we can document what we're doing now and send that information forward to future departments, the future Parks Department personnel who can then use that information to evaluate what we did. And so that'll help their adaptive management, is to be able to learn from what we did. Currently, we have some of that information, but we're going to be more systematic about storing that information so that it can be accessed on the long term. Then also some of the biological diversity and protecting waterways and wetlands, as I mentioned before, are going to be also key to climate adaptation. And finally, and probably one of the most interesting topics to discuss in restoration currently, is this idea of adaptive migration. It's very clear that the species that we have now in the Puget Lowlands are going to have to shift. Some species, like Douglas fir, seem to be able to adapt to warmer, drier climates. Other species, like hemlock and cedar, are probably not going to be able to survive the shift in climate. And we're going to have to start planting genetic provenances of those trees that are adapted to a warmer, drier environment. And so the plan calls for a systematic and stepwise fashion of starting to plant trees that are not native to the Puget Sound area, but they are still the native species. We'll be seeking genetic types from southern Washington, at least initially, to implement that. And that is not our devising. That's based on the scientific literature that's coming out of the University of Washington and out of BC Forestry. And BC Forestry and University of Washington are conducting ongoing research that we will use as it comes out to find out what would be the best choices for planting as we go forward. Okay, finally, looking at program history, we started out in 2005, 2006, funded at that level that I talked about, the original level A, B, and C service. Somewhere in the middle of the biennium, we got an increment of funding to bring other sites into the level of B service category. In 2007, 2008, we got funded for level B service of funding for all sites, and we also got additional funding for storm damage, because that came right after the Hanukkah Eve storm, and then we got funding for forest health survey. So with all those things, we had a big jump in funding in 2007, 2008. Then 2009, the end of 2008, the Parks levy passed, and so we went up a little bit more from there, and that we stayed level through the recession, and then have had a little bit of increase to the last biennium. So we're at a funding level that is allowing us to move forward, and I think if we sustain the current funding level, we'll be able to do the plan implementation that's contained in this plan update. So our recommendation to Council is to adopt this plan update as part of the forest or the open space vegetation plan.
Paul, just to clarify, the numbers there are biennial numbers, not annual numbers. Right. So if one wanted to know how much we're spending per year, you would divide by 2.
Roughly, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Council, questions? Yeah, Debbie?
Yeah, I have a question, and that is, part of it is you call out what it is that you see, and I'm on the Mercerdale hillside probably more than just any other open space part of it, and being there, and then there's 1 or 2 other parks, I've seen more orange tape around certain areas, and on the Mercerdale hillside there seems to have been some form of a landslide. That's probably an exaggeration or a very strong word for movement of earth downhill. What's going on? And what should we be doing? What should we be concerned about? Is this a trend, etc.?
We're growing orange tape now.
Are you? There's a at 7411. No. I guess I'm not clear what that is. There is a drain, there was a slide, and there was a drainage project installed in the hillside there.
There's been orange tape around an area I'm going to approximate for maybe a year and a half.
Okay.
Dan does know where it is. There's
the trellis project, they had to remove a lot of vegetation.
It's not the Trellis Project, it's a different one. It's on the North Mercerdale hillside.
Oh, North Mercerdale.
Sorry, I should clarify.
Oh, is that the,
Yes, that's the mitigation site. So this was
yeah.
And I guess, too, I don't want to take everybody through all the details of it, but is this something that we're seeing more of? Is it symptomatic, or is it just a one-off?
So that area actually has a long history of slowly slumping. There's a lot of water subsurface flow on that hillside right there. And that area that's flagged off that you see right in the middle of North Mercerdale, and it's very visible because there's really no vegetation around it. Remind me of the name of the development, Aviara went in. They were required to do a mitigation for a very small wetland infringement, and so they actually came out to North Mercerdale, and we indicated an area where they could do mitigation to try and slow down that movement of earth, and they've actually done quite a bit of work in there, and vegetation is coming back. But that's just to delineate where their project area is. It's not to delineate that there's an ongoing issue there, necessarily.
But to the root of the question, is it symptomatic of something that we're seeing more of? Because obviously landslides are first and foremost in people's minds these days.
I don't think I'm seeing more landslides, per se. Not necessarily. I mean, I think it's specific to that. I mean, there's a very wet hillside there. I would say, yes, I see movement in other very wet hillsides like that. We have to be very careful about, working in those areas.
Mike and then Benson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Well, Paul, you made quite a scientific project out of this, and I will commend you. It's probably the most statistically driven department in the city. So rub elbows with everybody else on that. That's a compliment. You mentioned in there short-term and long-term in the report, short-term and long-term, especially with reference to financing. Short-term, you said you needed more funds, but you had hope that in the long-term, the need for additional funds or greater funds would decrease. Mm-hmm. So define for me short-term and long-term in that context.
I don't know when, so I'll say in order to be able to start doing the work in this plan update, I'm recommending that we have the current level of funding for this biennium and the next two biennium. That allows us to have 6 years to do things like test some of the stability, the site stabilization things that we want to attempt, and then we'll have information about that. I think the plan was originally conceived as a 20-year plan. We're halfway through that. So I feel like our commitment is to be able to start reducing input by the end of this next decade. But I'm not sure when. We might be able to do it sooner, but I feel like it would be too soon to reduce funding in the next 6 years.
Benson?
Thanks, Paul. Just again, a couple of questions. I was I sort of like the fact that you had the excerpts from the experts so that you could sort of see what they thought about the plan. And I note that one of these experts had some comments or suggestions for changes to the plan or something. And this is like on page 84 and 85, Appendix F. And I was just curious whether or not you guys have actually, does a plan respond to some of this person's comments, or is there the intent to respond to some of his suggested changes?
I think that might be Clay Antos.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. We have incorporated some of his suggestions outright. Some of his suggestions are part of that site stabilization. I think his issues with compaction,
that's right,
in particular,
right,
are central to stabilizing a site, because we can't continue to have compacted soils and be able to have a site function on its own. So I think yes. The answer is that kind of feedback is incorporated into the plan. It may not be verbatim or as specific as his comment is, but it is part of what we're going to pursue.
It's been looked at and addressed, and
yes.
Okay. And then, do you envision? Should we take a look at this not 10 years from now, but sooner? I mean, I guess my understanding is that this is reviewed every 10 years. I guess this plan goes out to 2024. Is there any thought about trying to look at it as far as an update 5 years from now, or is that something you would suggest?
Well, we've been in the process of coming to council every 2 years to give some kind of update on the program. And we've done that pretty much every biennia. The last time it was on consent, but other times we've actually had discussion with full council about the program. So I don't think we're going to stop doing that unless directed in some fashion to do that. So you would get at least a written report on consent about what we're doing and what progress we're making every 2 years.
That's great. Yeah, I've only been on less than 2 years, so this is the first time. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's because evaluating progress less than every 10 years means that we would have to possibly cut corners, like Councilmember Ciro is saying. This is a major effort to get something that's statistically significant, that actually has real measurable value. Is work, and we don't want to do that too often because it's expensive, and we don't want to do it in a skimpy way, because then doesn't tell us anything. So we want to have robust data, but when we do it.
So I'll take a turn.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So, for those who might not know, before I was on the council, I was on the Open Space Trust Board and worked with Paul at that time. And during that windstorm, I did go out and just mostly to satisfy my own curiosity, I took a GPS along and mapped where trees had fallen and which way they'd fallen, and ended up with a map of all of that, which was interesting to me and very interesting to others, but at the end of the day, mostly just a curiosity. But at the time I was on the board, I was very interested in the idea of having more data to drive what we were doing. And at that time, it all felt a little bit catch as catch can in terms of taking funds and trying to target different areas of invasives and work on them. But I kept wanting to have more data and a sense of how this fit into the greater scheme of our park system and what the health was. And quite honestly, I'm just very excited about seeing the level of information here and the fact that it can really drive decision making in ways that are very, very data driven, and obviously the data you have has allowed you to have these conversations with outside experts and figure out what their opinion is of this. And so I think it's a very rich set of information, and it sort of warms my heart to imagine your folks out there in the field, essentially with their magnifying glasses, trying to figure out exactly how many plants of which type and what the heck is that plant that I'm seeing there. Mm-hmm. And so that was
actually there's no folks. It's that guy who's such a good plant ecologist. He knows all the plants.
Thank you. I noticed that there were a couple that he had to go unidentified on. So but it was in the way under 1% range. So well done on that. Thank you for that. One curiosity has been a point of interest to me over time was knotweed, and you'll recall that we did some work on trying to knock back knotweed back when there were very few spots on the island. In reading through this, I saw that there is some down in the 53rd Street open space. I didn't see it on the list of invasives at the end. I assume that's perhaps because it's not prevalent enough to have risen to the list, but I'm just curious whether there's a knotweed report I could get.
Matt Disler, Natural Resources Assistant. As for the knotweed, It's not on the list because the list in the back of the report is actually based only on those that were found in the plots that were laid out. So it's based on the structure of the study. So which species are found on a very selected area is a different matter. So that's why it's not there. But yes, there is a population there still.
Okay. Thank you. Jane.
Well, I want to congratulate Paul and everybody who worked on this report. It was really a huge effort and full of information. I learned a lot. But I wanted to concentrate on the public education part. It would be great if this were available to the public so that people could learn, like I did, that holly is really not good in your parks. We all know that English ivy goes up your trees and kills things, and we've had ivy information for decades, but not that much about holly and the other invasives that we may be allowing to migrate from our yards and things like that. And I guess it gets me also to public involvement. I remember the Ivy Brigade a long time ago, and I know that there's a lot of Boy Scouts out there working and pulling weeds and working, and the Conservation Corps, is it Earth Corps? Earth Corps. But I'm wondering if there are organizations like the Ivy Brigade, or if there's the understanding out there that there's still work to be done in our parks.
I think there is, and we're doing a couple of things. One is that on page 57 of the plan, the thing that you just learned about the holly, we're planning to do some public education about ornamentals that are invasive in the open space and try to do what we've done for ivy for holly. So that we love it that you're hooked into that, because that's one of our objectives. And yet it's kind of goes through cycles. Volunteer involvement. We have years where people get really revved up and amped up and want to do stuff, and then it kind of falls off. And but one of the things that we do to kind of keep bringing people in is we have service projects that involve students. We have the middle school come to Pioneer Park and do a service project every year, and that's a way that we get some more involvement that way. And both Mountains of Sound, Greenway, and Earth Corps do have an outreach component to their work, coordinating volunteers. So they're constantly reaching out to people on the island and offering, in addition to the volunteer days, other options for getting involved. So I think we're still trying to, and the reporter is great about running our events on their left column, so we get exposure that way. I mean, and Ross does his stuff in his newsletter periodically to promote it. So we're trying to keep it in the public eye, and I think we have to rely on that it does go through cycles, and staying the course and keeping in the game will help us get to the next wave. We've had some fall off in the last year in participation, but I don't think that's permanent. I think it's just a cycle.
Great, thank you.
Dan.
First, let me echo the praise you've already received from Mike and from Bruce. It really is an excellent report, and appreciate all the work that everyone did to produce it. So 2 questions. One, I noticed that your new system to replace A, B, and C is not going to be park-specific anymore. It's going to be, sounds like within a given park, it could be 2 or 3 different classifications by area. What has been, you've made it easy for the council in the past by doing it by park, and so we could then respond to that and in some instances, as you pointed out, provide additional funding. It's a little bit harder now, and I'm just trying to understand how you're going to come to us, whether during the budget cycle or otherwise, to say this is where we're, because in the past it was always number driven. It wasn't, and now it's now going to, I don't know how it's going to be driven. So
I think it'll still be. That's a very good question, and I don't have all the answers right at this moment, but I think we were starting to work off of actually the groundwork that you laid, which is that basically all parks should get level B service. I mean, you fought for that for years, and so we're assuming that's the consensus, is that we're maintaining ecological function is the baseline for our work. So that's what the ecological resilience level of service is, and that's why it applies to almost all the open space. But we're finding that there's some open space that's just really problematic, and they're not whole parks. They're like, this corner of this park, the soils are so bad, or the slope is so steep, or there's site-specific conditions where it makes no sense to try, investing, money to get a small area to perform at a level that other areas could perform at quite easily. So it's kind of a triage of trying to say most of the areas. I mean, we'll actually get more function this way because more parks will get, and more areas of parks will get that maintain ecological function level of service, and we'll just triage the really problematic areas.
But as long as in your 2-year reports, whatever, you're able to come to us with something which says, if you give us an extra $5,000 or $25,000, then we would do this or not. I mean, I just want to make sure that we can make intelligent decisions at that point. And the other thing is in your numbers chart at the very end, you did not include the current biennium,
right,
2015-16, where we did reduce the funding. Is the funding level we approved, is that going to sustain things, or are we going to see a supplemental request, as I've been led to believe is going to happen?
I'm going to, I'll let Bruce answer that. But I will say that the budget that was passed is, the funding level is virtually identical to the last biennium's. It's within $20,000 currently. But as the supplement, I'll let Bruce talk.
For the record, Bruce Fletcher, Director. As you may recall, there was a $25,000 per year reduction through the budget process. Finance Director Chip Quarter has informed me that that is going to be coming back to you in June, at end of the year's monies that is going to come and get back into open space. And it will be up to you as a council to approve the recommendation. But yes, that's coming to you in June, and then we'll go back to the open space.
Other questions? Debbie?
Just building up James, and that is, the extent to which you can or cannot participate in some of the formal volunteer days, super. But when people are walking through the park, do they carry a yard waste bag? Do they pull the Roberts geranium? Are you encouraging that type of activity? How do we help, and how do we support on something other than a fully structured work day, et cetera?
Well, we do have citizen activists who either work with us or take guerrilla action. We like them to work with us, and we in the rec guide it's probably lost on the bottom of the volunteer calendar, but we do offer training, which is basically anybody who wants to work on their own can meet with me for 2 hours, and I go over safety and forms and what is it that you want to do and where do you want to work, and let's go look at the area, and okay, if you want to work in this area, this is what you should do. And if somebody wants to spend 2 hours with me out in the field, they can work on their own, and then I just check in with them every couple of months to see how they're doing. And so we would love that. I think that's one of the most effective ways to get high quality work. Places that have been stewarded by 1 or 2 individuals. The example that comes to mind is Rita Moore up on North Mercerdale Hillside. She did incredible amounts of work on her own and with a couple of high school students in tow that covered almost an acre, and it was really just her pulling it off. It was just she was consistent. She did it every week. I think that's a great way to go, and maybe you're right. Maybe we should be wrapping that into our promotion.
That's helpful.
I think it's an exercise program. We should be selling it that way.
Adopt a park.
Yeah. Jane, did you have something?
I just had a question. At the end, there's a section on soil compaction.
Yes.
Which was real interesting to me, to hear that once compacted soils take a very long time to return, and it sounds like it made me think of Pioneer Park and people ducking off the trails and running across, and dogs, and I'm just wondering if this should affect policy at some point, because I just hadn't been aware of the importance of how bad soil compaction can be.
It is very bad. I don't think it's recognized as much as it should be. And it has been recognized. The Trust Board passed a special events policy a couple of years ago because they were having special events in parks that were causing off-trail compaction, and they were wanting to limit that. So we have some checks and balances for special events in the parks when we have like an orienteering event or a race or something like that to keep people on trails. But you're right, it's more like a death by a thousand cuts. It's the dog here and the kid over here and the holly picker or the salal picker or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of that happens, and some of it we can control. Like when we're hiring a company to do restoration, we can spec it so that we limit the amount of compaction. But then there's also the users that just do what they will, and maybe some public education would be a good route to try to limit that.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, Joel, you served on the Open Space Trust Board. Maybe you want to make a motion here.
Thank you, Bruce. I move that we adopt the 2014 Open Space Vegetation Plan update to amend the 2004 Open Space Vegetation Plan.
Second.
Discussion.
Joel lose his first motion.
Even the four of us were on this.
Seeing no discussion, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Paul, thank you. Elaine, Matt, thank you. Bruce? Thank you. Yeah, Jason, thank you all. Okay, let's take 10 because I know we've gone almost 2 hours here. Yeah, so we'll reconvene at 9:04.
Well, you know,
break the rules. Let's live wild. All right, the meeting will return to order something like 60 seconds early. All right, we move to Agenda Bill 5060, Amendment to Solicitor's Ordinance, first reading. Katie Knight.
You will recall that last February, the city's new solicitor's ordinance was instated, and it included a new definition of solicitors, as well as a curfew from 7 p.m. to 10 a.m., which that was very carefully considered. In the fall of 2014, I'm getting my years mixed up, the U.S. Mission sent a letter saying, hey, we want you to extend the curfew from 9 p.m. until 10 a.m., or don't have a curfew at all. So there was some discussion with council and such too, but given that there had been lots of lengthy discussion on the record with regard to why 7 p.m. appeared to be a reasonable time, place, manner restriction, that was, we determined we weren't going to change the ordinance, and the U.S. Mission sued us. It's always nice to have Mercer Island as sort of a poster child. Many of you, there's 4 of you who were able to attend a hearing on February 9th. We had outside counsel who assisted us in arguing this matter. And the short and sweet of it is that at the preliminary injunction hearing on February 9th, the city lost. The attorneys did a very good job, but we lost. So in the court's decision, which is attached as Exhibit A, it describes all the lengthy reasons he determined that. Although at the time that the decision was made with regard to the curfew, that there was no Ninth Circuit, when the Ninth Circuit case law, which said, anything before 9 p.m. on a curfew isn't going to be appropriate. Apparently, U.S. Mission is going to use us to say in the Ninth Circuit that don't do anything before, don't have any curfew before 9 p.m. And I pointed out at the end of my agenda bill that other jurisdictions in the state of Washington are looking at this decision and are looking at the whole curfew piece. I've been contacted by city attorneys in California where their California attorney for the U.S. Mission is shopping this. So I think you will see lots of other jurisdictions who are going to go, wow, look what happened at Mercer Island, don't want to have it happen to us. The other piece that was a little bit more subtle was the definition of solicitors, which was a request to change. In any event, the judge suggested we change that, and we had based it on a number of other similar cities' definition of solicitors, which seemed to have been upheld and worked throughout the years. And I can tell you right now that their city attorneys are scrambling to change the definition to conform with what is here before you today in this proposed ordinance. I'm going to so basically what the proposed ordinance does is to change the definition of solicitor, and it also provides, if you want to have a curfew, moving it to the 9 p.m. to the 10 a.m. One thing I wanted to advise is that it would be, I'm going to ask that we take out on page 19 of Exhibit 2, under 5.16.010 definitions, take out sub E. That was in the discussion with plaintiff's counsel, and somewhere between all the drafting of this, there's a whole bunch of attorneys involved. I know there's an attorney joke in there somewhere, but that was left in, and that should come out. It was an affirmative defense. It's E, which says any person prosecuted under the terms of this chapter. It's an affirmative defense, and Councilman Blanc kindly pointed that out, and so going back through and talking about all the attorneys again, too, we realized that was something that had gotten captured inadvertently and been in an earlier draft and should be eliminated. So that's going to be my recommendation, that we strike sub E on that section. If the council chooses to adopt this amendment to the solicitor's ordinance, the case against the city of Mercer Island that's in federal court will be dismissed. That was the mission's desire, that we actually, when they were actually arguing it before the court, they said they went to 8 p.m. instead of what they'd originally asked for. And so the court did say it's unconstitutional if you have the curfew begin at before 8 p.m., but the court very strongly suggested in its discussion during the motion, and as you can see, cites lots of case law from those jurisdictions, that a 9 p.m. start is probably far more appropriate. So that's why I put that in there too. I thought that was a lot cheaper than having to come back and have somebody stand in front of you a year from now and say 9 p.m. instead of 8 p.m. So.
I have a question right there. I mean, it seemed like the judge even kind of said 8, Mercer Island, would you consider 8 o'clock?
No, he said, would you consider 9 o'clock? What he was trying to suggest was, given the case law and the briefing, was that he thought 9 o'clock was more appropriate. So we asked U.S. Mission, are you sure you don't want 9 o'clock? And the U.S. Mission attorney said, we'll just go for 8. We'll let someone else deal with the 8 to 9 o'clock piece. So that's why they left it, and that's why I'm saying why are we in it? Why not just go right to the meat of it?
Recollection, the judge, Mercer Island, wouldn't you go 8 o'clock?
I think in the very beginning he did, but after arguments, then I think it got a lot murkier.
Yeah, my recollection was that, I don't know if he was being flippant, but, I think he just sort of threw that out as, well, will that get it compromised or get it settled? But I think the other cases in the jurisdiction, seem to point to longer, beyond 8 o'clock. So, I guess, I think maybe that's a trend that is working against us.
That was my read. If you read his opinion, that was my understanding what he stated later on. And he may have said that about the 8 p.m. Maybe he thought we were being petty by not going an additional hour without him knowing that the initial request was to go until 9 o'clock or to forgo one altogether, which he probably assumed that it was something more like that. So it appears that this will be the law in the state of, in the Ninth Circuit now, that they'll go along with the other jurisdictions saying anything before 9 p.m. will be probably determined inappropriate. So my recommendation is that you waive first reading and that you adopt these amendments. There's been lots of attorneys' hands on this, and counsel for the plaintiff has reviewed all this, had lots of discussion, so I think that at the end of the day, they'd be quite fine with this too. And then at that point in time, that will settle the entire lawsuit and be good to go.
Okay, questions? Debbie?
This is actually one that I'm just trying to figure out if I'm reading it wrong or if maybe there's just a spelling issue. It is actually page 19, and it's the first paragraph under, well, it's paragraph A, and it would be, but I think it's the second sentence, starting with, a solicitor makes contact for any of the purposes described in some paragraphs B and C without regard to whether the solicitor has a prior relationship with the person contacted. It doesn't feel like a proper sentence. Am I missing a strike or something somewhere?
Solicitor means any person. I think it's just really legal jargon that it doesn't read easily.
A solicitor makes contact for any of the purposes, but then it's like there should be a follow-on, so...
It's like a solicitor is someone who makes contact.
Well, it's sort of like originally someone thought that the first sentence was going to refer to subparagraph B and C, but instead it just says conducts commercial or not-for-profit solicitation, which happens to be B and C. So I think that's what makes it confusing, because the B and C is actually referring to commercial or not-for-profit solicitation in the previous sentence.
I don't want to play lawyer, but on the other hand, I read it and I don't get what it means, so...
I guess read in its entirety, it feels like I get it. A solicitor means a person who conducts commercial or not-for-profit solicitation by going from house to house. A solicitor makes contact for any of the purposes described below. So then it feels like the context sort of works.
But should we have to work that hard to read it? I leave it open to...
I'll tell you that this, like I said, there was 5 attorneys arguing back and forth too. So this is what ultimately language that was agreed to by plaintiff's counsel. So I don't find it the most readable fashion myself, but I also think too that it complies with the spirit of what we were trying to do to get to what the judge ordered in his decision.
I'm good with it, the extent to which the lawyers say it means what it's supposed to say.
This was not a fun exercise, let me tell you.
Let's see, I think Benson was next.
Speaking for myself, I actually questioned the language over, that was basically it suggested. Well, no, yeah, absolutely, but I questioned the language, or at least the wording as well. But I guess I'm okay with it. There's two comments I have. One is a possible deletion I would suggest because I just don't like the phrase, and that's in the 8th whereas, and it's this reference to and cultural norms. I just don't know what that means, and I think it just that's a personal thing. And so the other kind of a question mark I had regarding the language of the amendment was paragraph D of 5.16.010, paragraph D, as in David. I just thought it was a kind of a curious provision, this neighborhood. I can understand perhaps why you have it, if you have the, the proverbial Girl Scout kind of thing. But it was a kind of a curious one because, this idea of what's a neighborhood and half a mile presumption, I just found it kind of interesting. I'm curious whether or not anybody else thinks it's kind of an odd thing to put in. I don't know if it's a deal breaker, but I just raise it because I thought it was kind of a interesting language.
So I have to look at info on my phone. The cultural norms piece came out of, and I think you knew this by now too, came out of the language with regard to what makes sense, like why 9 o'clock, because culturally, in the olden days, you used to have a phone at home, and the phone would ring, and it was okay to call before 9 o'clock, but not okay to call after 9 o'clock, and life has changed with cell phones and such. But the reason the term cultural norms was put in was to address what's been in prior cases with regard to what's generally accepted in our society. It was just an effort for folks, for our two sides to say, look, we understand that there's a sense about what's okay to, when it's okay to contact somebody. So, trust me, I think this is not the best language ever, but there was a struggle.
My only response would be, if you ask most of the people on Mercer Island, they would say that it's not norm to call or to contact me or solicit me up to 9 p.m. I mean, I think that's what you would get, the cultural norm here.
But
and then I guess my point, the other point is, if you simply cut it out, then this language is consistent with, other case law, and that's really what it is. So anyway, if other people don't agree with me, that's fine. I'm just pointing out the kind of the language kind of problem I had with it, and also this paragraph D. I'm just more curious than anything else.
So I'll wade in here and say that I actually, I hadn't appreciated where Benson was going with that, but I'm with him. I think I don't like the thought of somebody being at my door at 9 a.m. I certainly wouldn't consider it to be our culture to think it normal that somebody is at my door at 9 p.m. and therefore it feels like the right thing to do is scratch that for that reason. And by similar note, please don't call my cell phone after 9 p.m. unless you've got a good reason to, because
I always have a good reason when I call you after 9. So let me just add to what I was just checking to confirm, because there was a couple pieces in here that were necessary to have to be consistent with the settlement agreement. So both of those suggestions can be in or can be out without impacting the settlement agreement. We would not have to go back to opposing counsel on that to get an agreement with the other party in order to get the settlement. So I'm not owning this language. If you want to take it out, we can take it out.
All right, thumbs up, thumbs down on that language, or further comments. Out is thumbs up, down. So out is it's thumbs
out. Okay.
Yeah, it's out.
And both D or just cultural norms?
No, we're just talking about the cultural norms right now.
You got that out?
Let's go back to D then. So Benson really raised, I think, sort of a more soft question there of what does that mean, and does that work for people? Anyone want to weigh in on their reaction to whether that suits them or not? I mean, personally, I'll say that I kind of like it there because I know I and others in my neighborhood have occasionally gone tapping on neighbors' doors, and I think the whole idea of community is one of those things we want to be promoting, and so personally, I favor having this. It's okay to go knocking on your neighbors' doors, but I welcome other input.
I agree. I do not want to have to go get a solicitor's license to go, a block away, and if I want to sell something to somebody, I just think it's not necessary. So I would speak to keeping in D.
Okay. Anyone else? Debbie?
I'm not sure I quite understand why a quarter of a mile. I guess we have to pick a distance of some sort, but...
So it's type, place, manner restrictions, that sort of thing too. So trying to get some where if you keep pushing it, where does it start to feel good and where does it not start to feel good? So,
Yeah, it's the distance you'd walk to the bus.
I mean, I think a quarter of a mile is completely arbitrary in terms of defining a neighborhood, but it's not worth.
Let's ask Councilmember Sir to walk it in high heels and see if that's okay. And the pencil skirt. Yeah, I have no ownership over it. If you want it in, you want it out.
Okay. Anyone else? It sounds like it's in, unless I hear somebody argue against it. Okay.
Okay.
In. Other comments, concerns, Dan?
So that's a question. If I'm working for a nonprofit selling Bibles, am I a commercial solicitor or a not-for-profit solicitor?
That's a good question. It depends if you'd be making money at it. If you're registered as a nonprofit organization selling the Bibles, you would likely be considered you would not be considered a commercial solicitor.
Because if I read this literally, I would be a commercial solicitor.
Mm-hmm. I think you'd have to be, I know. I think you'd have to be a not-for-profit organization too. But if you're out there making millions selling your Bibles,
I mean, assuming I'm working for, the Bible nonprofit corporation
of America,
but I'm selling it looks like. I mean, what I guess I don't understand is, to the extent a not-for-profit solicitor is actually selling something, it looks like they would not be a not-for-profit solicitor. But if this is what the group said is okay, it sort of seems to open us up, or open someone up to say that, but if you're selling something like a Bible, then you should be not considered a commercial solicitor. But
it depends if you're out there to spread the word of the Bible along with selling the Bibles, I suppose. So, yeah, like I said, I should have had the two of you come and sit with us too, because this is one of the most difficult exercises too, trying to figure out how to get that all in there too. But it's not the prettiest language. I'm not going to defend it.
Mike, you
got a motion?
Sure, if you're ready.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move that we suspend City Council Rules of Procedure 5.2 requiring a second reading.
Wait a second.
I'm not going to agree on that. I'm just getting this thing going.
Are you saying it and then you're going to vote against
So Mike's made the motion. I actually intended to ask that question. Mm-hmm. Why did you want to accelerate this when it feels like, this was an issue that was a big deal for our community back when we set it up.
Right.
So why accelerate it? So forgive me, Mike, I'm cutting right into the middle of your making a motion, and I'll back you out of that if you want me to. But
I was going to
two reasons.
Have something to I was going to talk about why this is one of those real second readings that we should do.
Yeah. For two reasons. You might remember that this one got pushed back actually a couple of times, because it probably would have said if we had our normal schedule that I wouldn't have felt badly waiting for 2 weeks. But given the fact that this is the 30th and then April 20th is the next City Council meeting, that was a big gap of time. The Plaintiffs' Council is waiting for our agreement on this too, so that we can close the case and get the case actually dismissed. So I thought that in terms of saving both sides money, that it made a lot of sense for it. There's not a lot of room for, on this one, this isn't one where the court has spoken. And so there's, I don't know what, other things you're going to do, short of saying either have no curfew at all or have it start at 9, I don't know what the discussion would be. So to me, it felt like you have a court's decision here, which is attached here. We know we have a lawsuit against us. A lot of this was just timing. If we'd had it the last council meeting, we could have had a second meeting and not had the big push in time. He's also waited, I'll say this, because we had planned to have this at the first council meeting in March, so we were hopeful to have it done then too, and it's just sort of a combination of timing and stuff too. But again, I don't know what, citizens may have concerns about this with regard to the curfew, but it's sort of, we have a court order, so I don't know what changes they can make.
I second the motion.
Thank you. Thank you for extracting me from that. Okay, discussion as to the motion.
There was a lot of citizen involvement with this, a lot of interest. I respect that the court has spoken, but this is part of the public outreach. We had discussion on some of these stuff, some of the issues here, the time, whether 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock. A second reading will give our citizens opportunity to weigh into that, to engage with us.
Anyone else? Katie, for me, you said additional cost in having this linger for another 3 weeks. Do you have any sense of what the cost would be associated with that?
We paid outside counsel, and then WCA is paying plaintiff's counsel his fees. I don't know that if he was concerned that we're not moving forward with this, since we have delayed it a couple of council meetings, and rightfully so. We have obviously had some huge issues, but my hope is that we get this completed tonight too, just so we could get those dismissed. The dismissal paper has been prepared by our counsel, so everybody's just sitting around waiting to go on that too. And I don't know if he felt like.
We're not paying them. I mean,
yeah, we are. Yes, you are. Yeah, outside counsel we're paying.
They're not doing it. Why, if we delay it 2 weeks, they're just going to move it onto their calendar 2 weeks back? There's not going to be any action for them?
I'm concerned that the plaintiff will find it concerning that the council felt that they had to wait with the idea that the citizens might come in and say something different than what the court ordered.
And I think that's the key point. I mean, we can sit here and talk our way to death, and we can have 100 citizens come out the next council meeting and tell us it should be 8 o'clock or 7:30 or something like that. At the end of the day, we've got a court order, and unless this council wants to go and waste more money and have lawyers negotiate and then end up going back before the judge again, that's where we're going to end up.
Right.
We're going to. This ordinance is awful, and it's, normally under any circumstance I would vote against this ordinance, but we don't. We're in a corner, and at the end of the day, we don't have any choice here. So might as well bite the bullet and move on, and not try to fool our citizenry into believing that they're going to be able to tell us something that's going to make a difference at this point.
Anyone else? All in favor of suspending City Council Rules of Procedure 5.2 requiring a second reading signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Nay. Motion carries.
I move to adopt ordinance 15C-06, amending MICC Chapter 5.16, Regulations and Licensing of Solicitors, to change the definition of solicitor and to change the curfew start time with the deletion that Katie mentioned.
And then the deletion in the whereas.
And the deletion of cultural norms.
Okay. Thanks.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Katie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council. We move to other business. Council member absences. None this evening. Any new ones upcoming that we should be aware of? No? Okay. Planning schedule. Kristen, you kept quiet for the most part. You got to talk.
I'll tell you what you have to talk about.
I know. We have a pretty ambitious schedule for April 20th. I don't know what else you
want us to say beyond, come prepared to work.
Well, we just gave you 30 minutes.
Yeah, by removing the solicitor's arguments.
Yeah,
So
I see
second
that.
reading.
That's
So Councilman Wong had an issue, not an issue, but he brought up about the our options in pushing back on transit with the bus turnaround, and receiving he implied receiving a brief on what our options were, legal or otherwise. Is that something we should schedule now?
Katie?
Part of the difficulty is that Noel had, and I've been talking with Scott Johnson, who's outside counsel with regard to this too, and I think in part we need Noel to be present to help capture what the actual questions we want to have asked and that answered. So I feel like we need him here to help guide that through.
And I would suggest to the council that legal research may be premature. We don't know whether we're even close to being at an impasse with Sound Transit. And then that's going to take several months, I would think, at a minimum, if we get to that point of being at an impasse with them. But the reality is that they're not going to construct anything to do with the bus intercept till 2021. So it's not like there's any urgency to making any decisions on whether we're going to, lie down in front of the bulldozers.
Well, it says April 23rd is a significant milestone.
It is, but they're going to make a baseline decision, but they're not going to actually come to the city and propose to start tearing up our streets or ask for any. Where you're going to get into a potential issue with them, where you're going to have to respond to, is at some point they have to do a supplemental EIS to deal with bus intercept. And they will, or somehow, they're going to have to do something with their EIS because it did not cover bus intercept. So they're going to have to either come to the city or do something with an environmental checklist or ask for a DNS or something like that. They're going to have to do something, and that's going to be a challengeable thing if and when that happens, and that would be our first opportunity to engage with them from a legal standpoint. But that's... if it comes to that point and we're really going down that road, we'll have plenty of time to plan that, rather than spend what could be $30,000, $40,000 in legal research right now to arm ourselves for something we might not have to arm ourselves for.
My suggestion would be we have, I think, the meeting scheduled for Thursdays, make sure we have Mr. Johnson on board. I should say, we do have him on board, we've already engaged him, and so have him come to the meeting and start to immerse himself in what the different issues are too, so he'll be prepared. But again, part of the problem is for any attorney too is like, well, what are the questions? What are the concerns?
And this is your subcommittee meeting on Thursday?
It is,
Okay.
yes. Sound Transit has offered up a meeting with
Okay, well, and that's good. I guess in response to Dan, I think it actually, I don't like to spend the money. I mean, that's $30,000 to $40,000, but
at least.
At least. But on the other hand, I think we need to be prepared, and in order to negotiate with Sound Transit, I think the council is going to need to know what our parameters are. And we need to know that sooner than later. I mean, we may not ever need to exercise our rights, but I think we need to know what they are, and I wouldn't want to wait necessarily until, if it's on the EIS or whatever. I mean, I think that's certainly one area that we potentially could challenge them, but I think we would be better served if we knew what our rights were early on.
I have a suggestion. Why don't council individually send me emails with what you believe your questions will be, and we'll at least start to begin to cultivate what the list of questions are, and then we'll have them come to the meeting. But I really feel uncomfortable. No offense, Kirsten. I really feel uncomfortable without Noel present to also help guide this too. I think that's important to have him here.
Also, Beth, from the subcommittee's perspective, and I believe it's the council's perspective right now, we are taking the position they need our approval. And that's our story, and we're going to stick to it. And so if they want to challenge that, so be it. So eventually, if they do challenge it, we're going to have to decide it. But right now, I can assure you that in every discussion we're having with them, we have not wavered from that one iota.
Boy, remember who you're dealing with. You're dealing with Sound Transit, who's been rolling over municipality after municipality, and you've got the example of Bellevue. Having a legal opinion is being proactive, and not only for the council to know our options, but also it kind of sends a signal of the seriousness that we attach to this issue.
They haven't rolled over Bellevue. That's a complete misstatement.
That's a mischaracterization.
No, it's not. I mean, there have been a lot of mitigation checks written that haven't necessarily been cashed. Now, I listened to the Bellevue leadership. Maybe you know something different than the Bellevue leadership, but the Bellevue leadership is frustrated on the mitigation that they're not receiving.
They're getting a tunnel.
What?
So, I'm just playing this out for a second. As Dan said, we're taking the position that we do have the authority to dictate whether Sound Transit could do bus intercept or not. If we do the legal research, we'll spend the money, for sure, and then we'll either know that we can stop them or we'll know that we can't stop them. Now, if we know that we can stop them, it seems to me we're right where we are today. And if we find out we can't stop them, we've put ourselves into a weaker position than we're in today. So it's not clear to me what the benefit of spending the money right now is. Debbie?
I would say it's important that tonight we've tabled the question. I think that's an important process across the council, and it's an important process with the public. I do see both arguments, basically, but what I would suggest is let us see what comes out, if anything, from the April 23rd meeting that changes concerns one way or the other in terms of what might be said or presumed or put into writing or not put into writing, and then come back in front of the council. We'll have a report out, I would like to think, either from the council itself or feedback from Sound Transit or some other form after the April 23rd meeting that would guide us in making the decision, do we need to take further steps in terms of legal research or not. But I would say Noel will be back by then. We'll have a sense of more specificity in terms of the baseline and what it does or does not say. And then we haven't lost anything significant, but we'll have more information to carry forward.
Mike, you're making notes. I assumed you had something to say.
No, I was just writing something else.
Okay, anyone else? Am I trying to get a thumbs up, thumbs down on this? We said we weren't going to have decision-making on this tonight, which is somewhat ironic that we find ourselves trying to make a decision on this. Trying not to get there, and Mike,
this is not
right. This is. I think that the discussions are. I mean, I think that.
The question was to put it on the schedule. Whether we were going to put it on the schedule.
We can put it on the schedule. But I mean, you're talking about the schedule. You want a legal opinion on the schedule? You can't do that.
No, we want to put we want to allocate time to brief the council.
That means getting the legal opinion, and I think Debbie's suggestion makes all the sense in the world. Let's see what happens on April 23rd. Mm-hmm. We're going to know a lot more then, and we're not going to in any way be prejudiced by waiting another month on this thing.
And I think it's a smarter use of money.
And we're also going to have an open house on the bus intercept, so we'll have information from the public regarding the bus intercept plans. So I think there could be other
things coming together for Sound Transit to come and brief the council.
Okay. I'm hearing let's wait on this. Okay. Let's wait on this. All right.
So we do have April 20th study session begins at 5:30.
I think at the last council meeting, we were going to make sure that all the council members could be here at 5:30, and I assume that we've got an affirmative on that, or I don't know if this was still tentative. Is there anyone who cannot be here for a start time at 5:30 on the 20th? Except for Joel.
But could you make it at 5:30?
Be absent at 5:30.
Okay, so great, we are good for the...
Kirsten, do you have the people who will speak, present at that? Do you have those folks identified?
Yeah, it's
Yes, Joe Tovar and attorney, I am blanking on her name. So there'll be...
Will you send their names to me, please?
Yes.
All right. Anything else on the planning schedule for right now?
No.
Okay. Board appointments, we have none this evening. Council member reports. Jane, you want to start?
Yes, I don't have a meeting report, but I have a real complaint about the traffic this past weekend. I don't know if any of you were caught in it, but it was a disaster, and I really think WashDOT did a very bad job of not only signing but diverting traffic, especially if you were coming, westbound. It was a disaster, but if you were coming southbound on Bellevue Way, that was closed off on Sunday, not Saturday, and you could not go across East Channel Bridge to get off on East Mercer Way. It was all closed off. There was no work being done there. You had to get off and go back into Bellevue and come around, and it was very poorly handled, and the signage was terrible.
So just for an update, and I was going to mention this during the report, this was brought to the attention of the 41st, Judy and Tana and Steve over the weekend, and they engaged with WashDOT today, and I got an email from Judy's legislative assistant just before the meeting saying that Judy had reached out and has got a meeting scheduled with WashDOT tomorrow to follow up on it. So they're also well aware of the situation, and I have promised to work with WashDOT to try to address this before the next closure.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Jane, anything else? No? Joel, looks like you've got some reading material there.
Yes, I've got reading material for the council.
I thought you were bringing Haggadas or something.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So this was one of the readings that we had in the Ag Forestry Leadership Program that I participated in over the course of 2012 to 2014, and it was my favorite of the readings that we had. So hope you enjoy it.
Thank you very much. Dan.
So I've already mentioned the traffic thing. We had a stakeholder group 2-day session since the last council meeting, and it was productive in the sense that the group was able to sort of become more functional as a group and sort of reaffirm an overall vision for the town center. We did not get to the point of making specific, or the group didn't get to the point of making specific recommendations regarding streets or heights or density or uses. That will come at the April 21st meeting. or at least the first part of it will come at the April 21st meeting. The Council Town Center Committee, Benson, Jane, and myself, have put together a list of questions that staff has forwarded to the consultants to make it clear what we as a committee at least want to see come out of the April 21st session in terms of guidance to the city. So just because there was some concern expressed by some that as to what exactly the goal line is here, and we wanted to make sure the consultants understood from our perspective what had to be addressed during the April 21st meeting.
Mike?
So, as you all know, the state transportation package had a public hearing, and it didn't get out of committee, which is not good. What I'm suggesting, the narrative is not satisfaction that tolling's not on there, or that people are opposing tolling, but the narrative's got to be to get that state transportation package out of committee. While it's still in committee, it could be really bad news for us. So I just ask/enlist you all to talk to the many folks that you know out there, to talk to Representative Cliburn and asking her to get that thing out of committee, basically in the format that she received it from the Senate. Otherwise, we're going to have tolling shadowing us for yet probably another 2 years, because you skip when short session, long session, when they do those budgets. This is the opportunity to get it done, and we need to identify success as being getting that thing out of committee.
Thank you. Debbie?
I don't have a report. I was actually looking for the specific reference, but I actually was going to congratulate our 41st Representative Tonnesend, who is bringing before, I believe, the House today, or there was a hearing on the equal pay legislation that's before. It basically updates the legislation in the House that ensures that irrespective of male or female, you receive equal pay for equal work, and I think that's a great step forward, and I commend her deeply for it.
Do you get the same as we do on the council?
We'll carry on the conversation.
Benson.
I just wanted to highlight that past couple of weeks, we've had these these groundbreaking ceremonies for the 4th Elementary School and also at the IMS, and it's been exciting days to see the progress that's being made as far as the construction of these, construction of the new 4th Elementary School and also the renovation of IMS. I also want to give a special shout out to the Mercer Island Rotary for putting on a fantastic run on Sunday. Councilmember Ciro and I participated. We ran and suffered and whatever else, but we made it. But it was a well-organized event, and a lot of people who live off-island complimented the Rotary for organizing having a well-organized event. And also, when I was running, I heard a number of people basically just comment how beautiful Mercer Island was, especially going through Luther Burbank Park.
To me, so fairly well-known islander Hal Quinn, I think many of you probably know him, sent the city, or dropped it off, I think, with Scott's department, a set of 4 DVDs called Designing Healthy Communities. And I took it upon myself to watch them. I actually sort of skimmed the last couple, but I certainly watched the first 2 all the way through. My takeaway was that I think at least disc 1 should be required watching for particularly the town center committee folks. And so I'm going to hand this off to one of the town center committee folks to watch or pass on to somebody else who... That was a quick handoff. But I would urge that you, as a group, consider, and I sent you an email because I contacted the producers of this and said, how could we make it so it's not just a serial watching experience, which is completely impractical. They sent back an email saying that discount pricing is available or the license could be made available. So I would leave it to you to sort out whether or where you want to go after you've had a chance to look at it. The thing I found particularly intriguing is that the narrator, the star of the story, is a pediatrician who's had a high-level job with CDC, I believe, and makes a very clear connection between health of residents and design of community. And I think that to me, was a very compelling message, and I'd encourage you to, at the very least, have a look at that first DVD for that reason and think about what the implications are for our town center design. But I'll leave it to you to go from there where you folks feel like you should go with that. That's all I've got. If there's anything else for the good of order, now's the time to speak. All right, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.